Chapter 937. Under Han Shua's instructions, the 5 elite zombies continued to strenuously maintain the gymnasium so that it would not be forcefully destroyed by the power of the gravestone. As they were worried that they would trigger a chain reaction from Little Skull, the 5 elite zombies did not exert their energy on the gravestone. They did not stop the energy from the gravestone from affecting the gymnasium at all. Han Shua's consciousness, which carried the energy of demon generals, was attached to the edge of the gymnasium, strenuously preventing the slightest bit of the gravestone's energy from leaking out. Both the 5 elite zombies and Han Shua were in grave danger as the gravestone continued to expand. If the power of the gravestone were to break through the ceiling of the gymnasium, the energy maintaining the gymnasium would immediately become chaotic and cause the surrounding space to explode. At that time, not only would the 5 elite zombies be directly impacted by the collapse of the space, but Han Shua's consciousness would also suffer tremendous damage. It could be said that Han Shua and the 5 elite zombies had placed their lives in the hands of Little Skull. However, Little Skull, who was fully focused on fusing with the energy of the gravestone, did not seem to know how dangerous the situation was. All of his soul energy was entangled with the gravestone, and he temporarily could not sense the urgency in Han Shua's heart. The inscriptions in his eyes were still flickering as he stared unblinkingly at the gravestone that was glowing with white radiance. Even though no external energy could enter the gymnasium, the gravestone continued to expand and maintain the stability of the gymnasium. Crack! Crack! The 5 elite zombies were sweating profusely as they tried their best not to be distracted. They exerted all their strength to resist the power of the gravestone. Han Shua's consciousness continued to divide and converge on the area where the tip of the gravestone was. The demon generals had no choice but to fill the area with their souls in order to prevent any energy from leaking out. Squeak! Squeak! Wisps of smoke rose from the surface of the gravestone. This meant that the demon generals had been annihilated one after another. Their soul energy had completely vanished from the world. The 5 elite zombies and Han Shua trembled in their hearts. They were deathly afraid that the power of the gravestone would suddenly increase, shatter the gymnasium, and kill all of them. While Han Shua's heart was filled with apprehension, the energy of the gravestone suddenly changed. The undulations of Little Skull's soul were clearly transmitted from the gravestone. It was as though the gravestone contained Little Skull's soul. It gave Han Shua and the 5 elite zombies a strange feeling. At the same time, the gravestone gradually withdrew its power and started to shrink. The 5 elite zombies and Han Shua simultaneously heaved a sigh of relief. They understood that once the gravestone shrunk, the gymnasium would no longer have any problems. They no longer had to fear that the space they were maintaining would explode at any moment. The densely packed inscriptions on the constantly shrinking gravestone revolved around Little Skull. When the gravestone had shrunk to the size of Little Skull, it suddenly shattered like a mirror. The shattered pieces of the gravestone shrunk to the size of a fingernail and settled on Little Skull's body. The fragments of the gravestone penetrated Little Skull's body with bizarre energy and sank into his heart and abdomen. A sinister radiance flashed across Little Skull's eyes. As though he had suddenly awakened from a deep slumber, he started jumping around the gymnasium. Creak, creak, crack, 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 crack. Crisp and clear noises came from Little Skull's body. It was as though his bones were being shattered. His body was as soft as cotton for one moment and abnormally straight for another. Bizarre inscriptions appeared on his skin and flesh. They looked like fishes occasionally leaping out of the water. It was an extremely bizarre sight. "Father, what's going on?" Metal Elite Zombie hastily asked Han Shua. "The energy of the gravestone has been dispersed. The fragments are constantly splitting and fusing with his bones. I can't be sure if this is Han Hao's own will or not, but I believe that this is beneficial to him." "There's no need to worry." Han Shua's avatar stared at Little Skull and explained in a deep voice. He could sense that the source energy of the gravestone had fused with Little Skull. The inscriptions were deeply imprinted on Little Skull's skin and flesh. Meanwhile, the fragments had drilled into Little Skull's bones and became one with them. After dancing for a while, Little Skull suddenly collapsed to the ground like a sponge. He remained silent and motionless. The active inscriptions on his skin and flesh no longer scurried about, as if they had also stopped following the little skeleton's silence. Only intermittent crisp sounds could be heard from within his body, causing one's scalp to tingle with numbness upon hearing them. Outside the gymnasium, Scarlet covered her mouth with a mournful face. Her tearful eyes gazed at Little Skull, who had collapsed to the ground. At this moment, the pain in Scarlet's heart was even deeper than the pain she had suffered years ago. She could not sense any aura in the gymnasium and therefore had no idea whether Little Skull's transformation was beneficial or not. Scarlet was not the only one who could not sense what was happening in the gymnasium. Even Ballins, Sanguiner, and Gilbert could only see with their eyes. From the outside, the gravestone had suddenly exploded and its fragments had pierced into Little Skull's body. Little Skull was writhing in pain until he could no longer withstand the power of the gravestone and collapsed to the ground. Since they could not sense that the gravestone had fused with Little Skull's bones and flesh, they naturally assumed that Little Skull had suffered a backlash from the gravestone and was on the verge of death. No, don't. Scarlet tried to rush into the gymnasium with a mournful face. Ballins was startled and hastily stopped Scarlet. He said to Scarlet calmly, "What we see may not be the truth. Don't be rash. If you enter the gymnasium now, not only will you not be able to help Han Hao, but you will also be injured by my senior brother's energy." Gilbert and Sanguiner also hastily stood in front of Scarlet to prevent her from acting rashly. The two were not concerned about Scarlet's life or death, but they were worried that her actions would disrupt the stability of the gymnasium. Even the slightest mistake could lead to major changes. They did not want Han Shua to be harmed because of Scarlet's reckless actions. Is he already? Scarlet pointed at Little Skull in the gymnasium with a mournful face. Ballins was slightly taken aback. He did not expect that this woman would have such deep feelings for Han Hao. In his opinion, Han Hao, who was an absolutely callous being, should not have any affinity with a woman. Ballins found it very strange. Ballins shook his head and comforted her. "He will be fine. We can't sense the situation there and have no idea what's going on. Besides, with my senior brother here, even if something were to happen to Han Hao, his life would not be in danger. You can rest assured about that." Ballins was not bluffing. He knew that Gilbert's body had been reconstructed by Han Shua after his death. Back on Profound Continent, Han Shua was already able to resurrect Gilbert. Now that his strength had multiplied, saving Han Hao would not be a problem at all. "That's right. I died back on Profound Continent, but my master resurrected me with his mighty power. You can rest assured that Han Hao will be fine." Gilbert hastily comforted Scarlet with his own experience. "Don't worry. I have fought that fella before. His soul energy is unimaginably strong. I believe that even if his body is smashed to pieces, his soul will remain unscathed. As long as his soul survives, Master has ways to resurrect him." Sanguiner, who had fought against Little Skull, chimed in. Although Scarlet was still a little skeptical, she had gradually calmed down and stopped complaining about Han Hao's death. It was at this moment that they saw from their vantage point that Little Skull gently bent his fingers. At this moment, from their angle, they could clearly see the little skeleton's finger bend slightly. Like a chain reaction, Little Skull's wrists, arms, neck, waist, and even his entire body seemed to have regained his strength. He stood up abruptly and stretched his neck, while stretching his arms and muscles with a curious look on his face. "Holy crap, this fella is really all right." Gilbert was about to continue consoling Scarlet when he suddenly noticed that Little Skeleton had stood up as though nothing had happened to him. Gilbert couldn't help but cry out in surprise. "That's right. I knew he wouldn't die so easily." Sanguiner was surprised for a moment before he mumbled to himself. "It seems that the quintessence shard has truly fused with him. His strength must have grown even stronger. This opponent is getting harder and harder to surpass." The 5 elite zombies in the gymnasium cheered with sincere smiles on their faces. Although they did not move their bodies, their mouths did not remain idle. "Are you all right, Big Brother?" "Haha, I knew you would be fine." "Big Brother, you scared us to death. We thought that the gravestone would keep expanding. To be honest, I was really scared. If the power of the gravestone suddenly went out of control, we would all be doomed. Haha, big brother, did you really subdue that damn thing? How was it? Is it useful? It's amazing. The 5 elite zombies slowly withdrew the energy of the 5 elements that filled the gymnasium while greeting Little Skull. They seemed extremely excited and delighted. Little Skull looked at the genuine smiles on the 5 elite zombies' faces and knew that they were genuinely concerned about him. After hearing their words, Little Skull realized that the 5 elite zombies had nearly died for him. Little Skull's heart was filled with warmth. The lines on his face turned extremely gentle. He put on a rare smile and said, "I'm fine now. The quintessence shard has completely fused with me. Even if I use some of its energy now, that fella won't be able to sense my location." "Very good, my future overgod of death." Han Shua laughed heartily and said, "In this war in the fringe, I want you to finish off Logue for me." Little Skull pondered for a moment before he put on a faint smile and replied, "All right." Chapter 938. As the energy of the 5 elite zombies gradually dissipated from the gymnasium, Scarlet, Ballins, Sanguiner, and Gilbert could finally sense the presence of humans in front of them. When the energy of Han Shua's soul dissipated, the 4 entered the gymnasium together. Gilbert and the others were congratulating Little Skull just like the 5 elite zombies. Scarlet was relieved to see that Little Skull had recovered. She quietly looked at him from the side. Han Shua was very gratified. He was very proud of the little skeleton's achievements. He believed that as long as the little skeleton was given enough time, his achievements would not stop there. His future strength was something to look forward to. Outside the gymnasium, Han Shua slowly stood up and put away the cauldron of myriad demon that was used to stabilize the formations in the pandemonium. Just as he was about to return to the underground palace to ask about Little Skull's condition, Han Shua's gaze pierced through the layers of mist in the pandemonium and landed in the depths of the mountain range outside the pandemonium. There was a region deep in the mountain range where the energy of lightning was much denser than other regions. Ordinary people would not be able to detect it from such a distance. However, when Han Shua retracted his consciousness from the gymnasium, he could clearly sense some changes in pandemonium and Tanai. The pandemonium had the ability to gather all the elements in the surroundings. Therefore, the elemental energy around the pandemonium would flow and converge towards the pandemonium from all directions. However, Han Shua's consciousness sensed that not only was the energy of lightning not affected by the pandemonium, but it was also much denser than other regions. It was obvious that this was abnormal. With one thought, a wisp of Han Shua's consciousness drifted out and stealthily infiltrated that area. When his consciousness arrived, Han Shua clearly sensed that a powerful life form was lurking there. That aura was very familiar to him. It was Salus. With a cold groan, Han Shua's body flickered as he passed through the layers of mist in the pandemonium. Han Shua knew the mountain ranges around the pandemonium like the back of his hand. He had also set up a few traps so that Han Shua would be able to go anywhere he wanted without anyone knowing. "Salus, Salus, how dare you still peep in here? Today, I will make sure you never return." Han Shua sneered in his mind. Back at the Misty Sea, his old enemy, Salus, had participated in the ambush. Now, the God Hunter alliance that was about to arrive was also connected to Salus. If Han Shua could kill Salus before the Great War, it would be a great boon to the French. Now that Salus had reappeared in the pandemonium, he must have the intention of dealing with the pandemonium. Since Han Shua had inadvertently discovered him, Han Shua naturally wouldn't allow Salus to leave this place alive. Salus, who was hiding in the dark, had released his divine soul to carefully observe the situation around the pandemonium. He knew that the pandemonium was full of hidden dangers and that Han Shua was probably in the pandemonium. Therefore, Salus was very cautious. Suddenly, Salus felt as though a cold wind was blowing at his divine soul. Salus was startled and immediately felt a strong sense of danger. He instinctively wanted to retract his divine soul. A wave of soul-shaking energy suddenly stabbed at Salus. In an instant, he felt as though his divine soul was being pierced by a cold light. The frigid energy nearly sealed his divine soul. Salus's god soul got hurt in just a blink of an eye. As he was flustered, He didn't think much and just retrieved his god soul into his god body. He hissed, "Who's there?" Hee hee. The cold laughter came from afar. It was so cold that it struck fear into one's heart. Salus's face jolted and he said in a deep voice, "It really is you." Surprisingly, this time, Salus didn't immediately retreat. Instead, he stayed where he was, as though he was waiting for Han Shua's arrival. "I didn't expect you to have the guts to come to the pandemonium." The sneer grew louder and louder. Han Shua's figure suddenly appeared in front of Salus in a streak of eerie light. He said in a mocking voice, "Salus, do you really think that I took advantage of you after your battle with Asura?" While ridiculing Salus, the demon generals in Han Shua's body spread out like tentacles to block Salus's path of retreat. Although Han Shua did not know why Salus didn't flee immediately, Han Shua wasn't going to hold back now that he had the opportunity to make Salus stay. As he spoke, demon generals flew out from Han Shua's body and filled up Salus's surroundings. Not a single one of those demon generals was a match for Salus, especially since Salus cultivated in the energy of lightning. Demon generals were a natural bane to Salus. Han Shua knew this, but he still released his demon generals. Of course, it wasn't because he wanted to stop Salus with those demon generals. Han Shua only wanted to use those demon generals to alter the space around him so that Salus couldn't use teleportation scrolls to escape. With Han Shua around, Salus's lightning energy wouldn't be able to deal with the demon generals around him. "I know it wasn't luck. Even if I didn't fight Asura that time, I wouldn't be a match for you in a real battle." Salus looked at Han Shua and said in a solemn voice, "Back at the Misty Sea, I was even more certain that I wouldn't be a match for you." Han Shua was rather surprised to hear those words. He looked at Salus with puzzled eyes. Han Shua asked, "Then why did you come here alone?" Han Shua put on a smile and said mockingly, "Did you really come here to die?" "Brian, I didn't come here to make an enemy out of you," Salus said with a straight face. "Oh?" Han Shua's interest was piqued. Since the area around Salus was affected by the demon general's energy, it would be impossible for him to leave easily. "I have destroyed your Empyrean peak and replaced your position in the Omphalos. You still don't want to make an enemy out of me?" Han Shua couldn't help but laugh. He shook his head in disbelief and said, "That's interesting. Then tell me, why did you come here?" "To work together," Salus replied in a deep voice. After thinking for a moment, as though fearing that Han Shua wouldn't believe him, he explained, "After all, I'm not a god hunter. There's no way I can truly communicate with them. Besides, those hegemons of the god hunters aren't reliable. I can't trust them. I know Tyre and Log very well. They are always scheming against others. If I were to find someone to work with, it wouldn't be them." "What about Wasis and Asura? Those two have a decent reputation in the fringe. Why don't you look for them?" Han Shua asked curiously. "I have fought Wasis and Asura before. They can't even defeat me. How can I trust them?" Salus put on a disdainful face and groaned. "I, Salus, have lived in the fringe for many years. I have my own principles. I don't give a damn about those who can't defeat me." Han Shua was even more amused by those words. He put on a big smile and said, "All right then, tell me, what do you want me to work with? What can you give me and what can I give you?" "I can give you all the information I know about the God Hunter Alliance. I can lead those God Hunters into your trap. As they aren't familiar with the fringe, they will naturally listen to me." Salus explained his value to Han Shua without the slightest hesitation. After taking a short pause, Salus took a deep breath, looked at Han Shua, and said, "I want to return to the fringe. After this war, there will surely be casualties in the fringe. It could be Tyre, Log, Wasis, Asura, or all of them. I just want you to help me and acknowledge my position." "That's simple?" asked Han Shua. "That's simple," affirmed Salus. "How can I trust you?" Han Shua pondered for a moment and looked at Salus with a gloomy face. If Salus was truly willing to help him, he would have a much greater chance of winning the war against the God Hunter Alliance. He might even be able to change the power structure of the fringe. However, he and Salus used to be enemies. He didn't know if Salus was telling the truth or if Salus would play a trick on him at a crucial moment. This matter was too important. A small mistake could change the entire war. Therefore, Han Shua dared not be careless. I don't know either. But if you agree to work with me, I can immediately give you some important information. It can help you understand the situation better and even give you the upper hand. Salas seemed rather troubled. It seemed that he couldn't find a way to prove his sincerity. After all, he and Han Shua were enemies. After hesitating for a moment, Han Shua nodded and said, "All right, I'll work with you. Tell me what information you have." It was unknown if Salas really trusted Han Shua, but he wasn't afraid that Han Shua would go back on his word. He said in a deep voice, "Dagmar knows that Han Hao has a quintessence shard and is preparing to deal with Han Hao at all costs. He has brought all the experts from the Death Dominion here and has been plotting for a long time. Also, I've discovered that Tyre and Daka from the Destruction Dominion have some sort of connection. Tyre was well aware of the God Hunter's movements back then, and Daka seems to have his own way of doing things in the Fringe. If he didn't have connections in the Fringe, he wouldn't have been able to know so much. I have my own reasons for believing that Tyre and Daka are related, but I haven't confirmed it yet, so I can't tell you for now. You just have to have an idea of what's going on. Don't you think that the two of them look rather similar?" Han Shua was shocked. When he thought about it, he really did feel that Daka and Tyre looked rather similar. Not to mention that they both cultivated in the energy of destruction. After a moment of silence, Han Shua said, "We can talk about it." Salas was delighted. He knew that Han Shua's words meant that Han Shua believed his sincerity. The two of them set up layers of barriers around them and held a secret discussion in this place. Only then did Salas sneak away in satisfaction. Chapter 939. ******** The Omphalos in the Fringe. Tyre, Log, Asura, and Wasis gathered in Tyre's sovereign shop to discuss the God Hunter Alliance's invasion. As time went by, the four received news that the 12 hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance had gathered outside the Fringe. The war could break out at any moment. The four sovereigns had also subdued the leaders of the major and minor factions and were secretly preparing for war. All the fiends in the Fringe had stopped fighting and killing each other. The wind spirits were lurking in the dark to gather information. "Asura, you have a good relationship with Brian. Do you know why he hasn't come?" Tyre's face was rather unsightly. He had sent messengers to the Pandemonium several times to invite Han Shua over for a meeting, but was rejected by Stadholm with the excuse that his master was in seclusion. Now that they had received news that the God Hunter Alliance was about to launch an attack, it was inexcusable that Han Shua hadn't shown up. Asura shook his head and said, "I have also sent messengers to the Pandemonium. They received the same news as you did. It seems that Brian is at a critical juncture in his cultivation. In any case, the positions on his side have already been discussed. He should know what to do. Perhaps he has already arranged everything." "I hope so." Tyre groaned and said in a displeased tone, "If his side is defeated, the God Hunters will march straight into the Omphalos. We cannot afford to be careless. Right, Asura? You have a good relationship with Brian. I hope you can send someone to inform him that the God Hunters will attack in the next few days. Tell him to mind his own business." "Sure." Asura did not continue to argue with Tyre at such a sensitive time and straightforwardly agreed, "I hope he can hold on. That fella has been acting like a tyrant recently. He should have some capital," Log said with a sinister smile. No one knew what kind of filthy thoughts were going through his mind. His face was filled with malice and cunning. "Who are you? Can't you go in? Stop." Suddenly, a cry of alarm came from outside the Sovereign King's shop. Tyre's face darkened with displeasure. This sovereign shop was under his name. Many people in Tanai knew that he, Log, and the others were gathered here. Now that four of the strongest existences in the Fringe had gathered here, who would be so audacious to do so? "How dare you barge in?" Bang! A muffled sound came from outside the Sovereign King's shop, and then everything returned to silence. "Hee, Tyre, someone actually dares to make a move on your territory. Interesting. Log laughed strangely and teased. Wasis and Asura were also puzzled. They had no idea who the intruder was. From their point of view, no matter who it was, no one should recklessly barge in at this time. After all, the four sovereigns were gathered here. No matter who it is, if they dare to break in, they will die." Tyre was so angry that he laughed. He sat there motionlessly, waiting for the person to enter. Although Tyre did not walk out of the fringe with his powerful divine soul, he could sense that the intruder cultivated in the energy of death and that the intruder was only a mid-stage high god. Although experts of this level weren't everywhere in the fringe, they weren't rare either. As one of the strongest sovereigns in the fringe, Tyre obviously wouldn't put such an expert in his eyes. But in his heart, Tyre found it a little strange. Such an expert shouldn't have the guts to barge in, especially when a late-stage high god of his was guarding the perimeter. No matter how he looked at it, the intruder shouldn't have the guts to barge in. While Tyre was secretly surprised, he was shocked. He suddenly found that the boundary he had set up had actually cracked open, and a figure had quietly drilled in. The intruder swept his eyes across the 4 people in the room before his gaze landed on Logue. He asked in an indifferent tone, "Are you Logue?" Logue stared blankly for a moment. He looked into the eyes of the intruder and suddenly felt that the divine energy of death in his body was rather strange. It had become extremely chaotic and out of his control. Logue was aghast when he sensed the abnormality in his body. He immediately nodded and said, "That's right, I am Logue." The intruder nodded and stared at Logue with his eyes. Intense, agile energy ripples immediately enveloped Logue. Logue's pupils instantly turned white. He stood motionless as though he had been petrified. "Who are you? What have you done to Logue?" shouted Tyre. He suddenly stood up and glared at the intruder. It seemed that he was ready to slaughter the intruder at any moment. Wasis and Asura also stood up and surrounded the intruder. They planned to cooperate with Tyre. "You'd better not attack or I will slaughter all of you," said the intruder as though his soul was slowly peeking at Logue. The intruder's soul seemed to be slowly peeping into Logue's body. Yet, he still had the leisure to speak at such a time. Furthermore, he spoke in such an understated manner. It was as though Tyre, Wasis, and Asura weren't sovereigns of the fringe, but ants that he could squish with a wave of his hand. Tyre thought that he had seen his fair share of arrogant and despotic characters, but he had never seen someone as arrogant as Han Shuwa. Tyre was instantly enraged. His usual good temper was nowhere to be seen. He laughed maniacally and said, "Even if you are a hegemon of the Godhunter Alliance, you won't be able to come back alive today. Let's see how you kill us all." As soon as he finished those words, Tyre was about to attack. "Tyre, don't move." At this moment, Logue's eyes regained focus. His body shivered, and he abruptly shouted. He looked at the stranger in front of him with a face full of fear. His voice was trembling as he said, Do you have any instructions?" Logue used the word sir and not you. Tyre was dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that Logue was the same person he had known for many years. Logue was famous in the fringe for being ruthless and vengeful. He had never used any honorifics or feared anyone. But at this moment, Logue was obviously terrified. He even spoke humbly, which was completely different from his usual demeanor. "Tyre, don't move," Logue repeated. Shortly after, he bowed to the intruder and asked, "How may I be of service to you? Apart from you, how many other experts of death are there in the fringe?" The intruder asked calmly with a faint smile. "Han Hao, Longqi, Hu." Logue thought for a moment and respectfully reported the names he knew. "Where are they?" The intruder seemed to be very satisfied with Logue's attitude. He nodded and asked again, "I don't know where Han Hao is, but the others are." Logue bowed and quickly reported what he knew. Very good." The intruder didn't waste any more time. He turned around and left after Logue answered. He didn't even look at Tyre, Wasis, and Asura, who were dumbfounded. After the intruder left, Tyre looked at Logue solemnly and asked, "Who is he? Your father or grandfather? Why are you so respectful to him?" Logue took a deep breath and slumped on his seat. He first calmed himself down before he put on a bitter smile and said, "I wouldn't have been so respectful to my father or grandfather. If he really was my father or grandfather, I wouldn't have ended up in the fringe." "Who is he?" Even the taciturn Wasis couldn't help but ask coldly. "An overgod." Logue gasped for breath as though it took a lot of effort to say that word. He paused for a moment, as though fearing that Tyre and the others didn't know what was going on. He added with a bitter smile, "It's obvious that he isn't a dabbler like me." When Tyre, Wasis, and Asura heard those words, their faces were filled with fear. They were drenched in cold sweat. No wonder. I should have guessed it. If it wasn't for him, why would you, Log, wag your tail like that? Wasis nodded in astonishment. Fortunately, I listened to you and didn't attack. Tyre put on a bitter smile and shook his head. Otherwise, the fringe would have been razed to the ground before the God Hunter Alliance arrived. Why would he come to the fringe? What does he want? Asura was rather flustered. He mumbled, Could it be that those existences from the 12 dominions really want to destroy the fringe? How could this be? How could this be? I don't think he came here for that. Log slowly calmed down and analyzed. Otherwise, the 4 of us would be dead by now. I think he should have other matters to attend to this time. Log closed his eyes and thought for a moment before he slowly said, He seems to be looking for something, or someone. Just now, his soul was wandering in my body. Not a single one of my secrets escaped his prying eyes. He probably didn't find what he was looking for. That's why he let me go. I hope so. Otherwise, no matter how hard we try, we won't be able to escape the fate of annihilation. Asura was rather pessimistic. He knew that he stood no chance against such a powerful opponent. Let's call it a day. I think we all need some time to calm down and think about what we should do next. When Tyre saw that the 3 of them had no interest in discussing the God Hunter Alliance, he decisively ended the meeting. Wasis, Log, and Asura also felt that they needed some time to calm down. They nodded in agreement and left one after another without waiting for Tyre's reply. This time, Log didn't stay behind alone and left in a daze just like Asura. After the 3 of them left, Tyre stayed in silence for a long while before sneaking out of the Omphalos. He went to the volcano where he had discussed the matter with Han Shuo and the others. He set up a boundary around one of the walls and took out a magical mirror to communicate with Daka. Not far from Tyre's cliff, a shadowy figure was standing in the shade of a large tree, quietly sensing Tyre's movements. Chapter 940. Tyre didn't know that someone was spying on him. He took out a magical mirror and contacted Daka. When the mirror showed Daka, Tyre hurriedly said, Big brother, there's been a change in the situation. What's going on? I'm discussing with them how to attack the fringe. Why did you contact me so urgently? Daka frowned and asked in a deep voice. Just now, a chief god came to our land of chaos. We 4 sovereigns were almost killed. Tyre seemed to have not recovered from the shock of the chief god of death, and his voice was a little hurried. An overgod? What's going on? Daka was rather surprised. However, he didn't seem to be in contact with any of the peak overgods. An overgod with a quintessence. Tyre emphasized. What? Daka panicked. He finally realized the severity of the situation and exclaimed, What's he doing in the fringe? Tyre smiled bitterly and recounted everything to Daka in detail. Daka's expression grew more and more grave as he listened to Tyre's description. After a while, he suddenly chuckled and said, I know why he's going to the fringe. Haha, so that's how it is. Dagmar, it seems like you won't have any hope of getting that thing. Daka laughed for a while before putting on a serious face and said, Don't worry, the overgod of death's target isn't you guys. You don't have to worry about anything. All right, let's take a break for now and wait for the overgod of death to settle his matters before we begin. Otherwise, with him in the fringe, there will be many variables on both sides. After that, Daka explained to Tyre about the quintessence shard in Little Skull Han Hao's body. After Daka finished, Tyre was shocked and said with jealousy, Why are those 2 so lucky? After a short pause, Tyre calmly said, One Brian is hard enough to deal with. That Han Hao has a quintessence shard in him. He'll be a disaster in the future. You can't leak the news that Han Hao has a shard of godhood. Only Dagmar, Acer and I know about this. Once this news gets out, our relationship will be exposed immediately. Even now, due to my familiarity with the fringe, there are people who are starting to suspect me. For the sake of our mission, we must be careful. Daka said solemnly. I understand. Tyre nodded and said smilingly, the fringe is only so big. Logue also pointed out Han how to the overgod of death. I believe that when the overgod of death realizes that the others aren't his targets, he will naturally go after Han Hao. Well, we don't have to do that. As soon as Han Hao dies or the overgod of death leaves the fringe, notify me immediately and we will proceed with the plan. Once this is over, you'll be in charge of the fringe and I'll be in charge of the Godhunter Alliance. We'll have the chance to go to Eternia, said Daka. Tyre nodded with a smile and chatted with Daka about the current situation for a while longer before cutting off the connection. Not too far away, a wisp of smoke quietly drifted into the distance. It was soundless and didn't have the slightest trace of life. The wisp of smoke only took the form of Han Shua 100 miles away from Tyre. After half a month of observation, he finally confirmed Salas's guess. Tyre and Daka, the hegemon of the Godhunter Alliance, were actually brothers. This shocked Han Shua greatly. If he hadn't made this discovery today, he would definitely be attacked by the two brothers when the war with the Godhunter Alliance started. The two brothers cultivated in the Edict of Destruction. Tyre was already the strongest sovereign in the fringe, while Daka was slightly stronger than him. If the two of them were to join forces, their strength would increase tremendously. They would probably be even more terrifying than the combined forces of Wasis, Asura, Logue, and Salas. Fortunately, with today's discovery, Han Shua could make preparations in advance to avoid being attacked by the two brothers. Furthermore, by making use of the relationship between the two brothers, Han Shua would be able to defeat them in one fell swoop. Having made up his mind, Han Shua immediately returned to Pandemonium. The biggest problem he faced now wasn't the two brothers, but the overgod of death, Nestet. Even though Han Shua's strength had improved by leaps and bounds, he knew that he definitely wouldn't be a match for the overgod of death. Since Logue had reported the name of Little Skull Han Hao to the overgod of death, his safety was no longer guaranteed. Given the overgod of death's abilities, he would definitely be able to find Han Hao. In order to prevent that from happening, Han Shua had no choice but to protect Little Skull with all his might. And he had to do it quickly. After arriving at Pandemonium as fast as he could, Han Hao summoned Little Skull and explained the dire situation to him. Then, Han Shua said, "We have to think of a way. Otherwise, we won't be able to escape if the overgod of death sets his eyes on us." After a short pause, Han Shua said, "You said that you have fused with the quintessence shard. If the overgod of death were to stand beside you, would he know that you have the quintessence shard?" "He should be able to." Little Skull nodded after pondering for a moment. Han Shua felt a headache coming on. He was certain that the overgod of death would be searching for those who cultivated in the Edict of Death that Logue had reported. Once he had scanned through every single one of them, he would definitely lock onto Han Hao. The fringe was only so vast and the power of the overgod of death was so terrifying. It wouldn't be long before he came knocking on Han Shua's door. Although Han Shua had laid down layers upon layers of demonic formations in the Pandemonium, he didn't think that it could withstand the visit of an overgod who possessed the quintessence. Han Shua felt that this was a very difficult situation. He couldn't come up with a solution no matter how hard he tried. He had no idea how to avert the crisis Little Skull was in. "Why don't I hide in other dominions for a while and not return to the fringe for the time being?" suggested Little Skull when he saw Han Shua's anxious face. "That's one solution, but it won't solve the root of the problem. If that overgod of death can't find his target in the fringe and then finds out that you are not here, he will be certain that you have the quintessence shard. Once he is certain, things will get even more difficult," said Han Shua with a bitter smile. He scratched his head in frustration. Little Skull didn't say anything else. He thought for a while and realized that there was really no way he could deal with the situation. Unless he and Han Shua could improve their strength to the point where they could face the overgod of death head-on, there was no way they could deal with the overgod of death. Demonic arts couldn't be improved overnight. Han Hao, who had just fused with the quintessence shard, wouldn't be able to face the overgod of death in a short period of time. Even if Han Hao had fully mastered the power of the quintessence shard, he would still die if he faced the overgod of death who possessed the quintessence. The little skeleton couldn't come up with a solution no matter how much he thought about it. He hung his head, unable to come up with a solution. Let's brainstorm and come up with a solution as soon as possible. Han Shuo took a deep breath and immediately sent a message to Balins, Gilbert, Sanguiner, Scarlet, and the 5 elite zombies who knew the secret of the quintessence shard. Han Shuo quickly explained the dire situation to the crowd. Then, in a grave voice, he said, "The situation is very dangerous. I really can't think of a solution for now. One person's power is limited, and it might take some time for me to come up with a solution. We need to come up with a solution as soon as possible." After listening to Han Shuo's narration, the crowd's mood turned heavy. They exchanged glances with Han Shuo and put on distressed faces, trying to come up with a solution. However, an overgod who possessed the quintessence was a synonym for invincibility in this universe. Apart from other overgods who also possessed the quintessence, no living being could contend against them. Now that such a terrifying existence was coming and had locked onto Little Skull, there was no way they could fight it head-on. All they could do was focus on dodging. Even if they were to leave the fringe, as long as the overgod of death was certain that the quintessence shard was in Little Skull's possession, it would only be a matter of time before Little Skull's misfortune befell them. It would be incredibly difficult to come up with a solution to both the symptoms and the root of the problem. It was too difficult. No matter how hard they thought about it, no one could come up with an idea that could solve the problem for a while. The day quickly passed. Occasionally, 1 or 2 seemingly good ideas would pop up in the middle of the day. However, none of them could withstand careful deliberation and were quickly rejected. Gradually, the crowd became less and less talkative. While the others were still calm and collected, Gilbert was getting rather irritated. He kept saying that he might as well go all out against the overgod of death. If we could go all out, why would we wait for you to say anything? Han Shuo bunched his brows and chided Gilbert. I've already died once anyway. At most, I'll just die again, snorted Gilbert. That guy's forte is the power of the soul. If you die this time, you won't be able to preserve your soul temporarily like the last time. Once the brand on your soul is destroyed, I won't be able to resurrect you no matter how powerful I am. When that time comes, you're really done for, snorted Han Shuo coldly as he shot a glance at Gilbert. Senior, now that you mention it, I suddenly remembered something. Can Han Hao separate his soul from his body like what Gilbert did back then? The quintessence shard has already fused with his bones. If he could attach his soul to another divine body, would he be able to hide from the overgod of death? Ballins's eyes lit up. He seemed to have gained some inspiration from Gilbert's words. Upon hearing this, Han Hao was also shocked. He asked Little Skull, Han Hao, since you've cultivated demonic arts, the form of your soul should be different from ordinary people. Can you separate your soul from your body? Little Skull seemed to have never thought of this question before. He silently gave it a try and nodded. I think I can. Chapter 941. Given Han Shuo's abilities, as long as Little Skull's soul could escape from his current body, he would be able to create a new body for Little Skull. Once Little Skull's soul entered the new body, he would not have to worry too much even if the overgod of death came knocking on his door. Gilbert, Ballins, and the others became excited when they heard Little Skull's words. Scarlet, who had been worried about Little Skull, felt relieved. She asked, "Are you sure you'll be fine?" Little Skull looked at Scarlet and nodded affirmatively. "I should be fine." "That's great." Han Shuo put on a smile and said to Little Skull, "Let's not waste any more time. In order to solve this problem as soon as possible, let's gather the materials and I'll immediately create a new body for him. With the help of a high god skeleton and some special potions, it won't take too much effort." "Father, I have another problem." Little Skull hesitated for a moment before he bunched his brows and said, "Part of the quintessence shard has fused with my body, but the inscriptions on the tablet are intertwined with my soul. I'm worried that the overgod could detect it through my soul. It shouldn't be a problem to separate a strand of your soul and maintain your consciousness." Han Shuo was suddenly enlightened now that his train of thought had been opened. He thought for a moment and found a solution along this path. The demonic arts he cultivated could allow him to divide his consciousness into thousands of strands. Little Skull's life form was different from that of an ordinary human being. Since he could separate his soul from his body, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to create a secondary soul similar to an avatar. Now that he had the right direction, it would be much easier to solve the problem. Not only that, Han Shuo came up with a new idea. He smilingly said, "Don't worry, I have a way. When the time comes, I'll extract a part of your soul and attach it to a new body. Then, both your main soul and the new body will leave the fringe. When the Overgod of Death comes knocking on your door, the Overgod of Death will be free to explore your soul and body. As long as the real you uses the power of the quintessence shard outside the fringe, the Overgod of Death will sense it and expel you. Only then will you be truly safe." "Father, what do you mean by secondary souls? How can I do that?" Little Skull thought for a while and was confused. "Just like this." Han Shuo laughed heartily. He released his 2 avatars that usually stayed in the cauldron of Myriad Demon. 2 identical Han Shuo appeared in front of the crowd. Both had the same temperament and appearance as the original Han Shuo. "I understand." Little Skull carefully examined the 2 avatars of Han Shuo for a moment before he nodded, indicating that he understood Han Shuo's consciousness. The 5 elite zombies and Gilbert were not particularly surprised that Han Shuo had avatars. However, Scarlet and Ballins were not too aware of this secret of Han Shuo's. When they saw 3 identical Han Shuo appearing in front of them, they were astonished and couldn't help but ask questions. Han Shuo did not explain much. He turned to Little Skull and said, "Let's not waste any more time. Let's get started. After a while, I will tell you what to do. Don't worry, the doppelgangers you create will have the same soul undulations as your main body and will not carry the aura of the quintessence shard. I'm certain that even the Overgod of Death will not be able to detect anything amiss." "All right." Little Skull nodded and seemed rather excited. In the past, Han Shuo's 2 avatars were mostly formed by luck. But after Han Shuo's strength reached the Skybreak realm and he absorbed new memories of demonic arts, he had mastered the method of creating an avatar. Therefore, he was very confident this time. Soon enough, Han Hao and Little Skull arrived at the storeroom of Pandemonium. They picked out the materials needed to create an avatar. Han Shuo took out white bones and sparkling stones. The storeroom was filled with all sorts of rare materials. Some of them were left behind by Han Shuo when he was setting up the Pandemonium's grand formation, while the rest were looted by Little Skull from the shops in the Omphalos. All sorts of strange materials were piled up in the storeroom. Not to mention creating a puppet that could fool the Overgod of Death, it would not be difficult for Han Hao to create an avatar with great magic power. Creating an avatar requires too much time and energy. We don't have that much time. Besides, even if it's a real avatar, it won't be able to withstand the Overgod of Death's attacks. Therefore, I'm only going to create a puppet that can fool the Overgod of Death. This will save a lot of time. After all the materials were gathered, Han Shuo brought Little Skull out of Pandemonium and started forging a new body at the center of a ready-made demonic formation. While Han Shuo's main body used a portion of the Cauldron of Myriad Demon to forge a new body for Little Skull, his avatar explained to Little Skull how to separate a strand of his soul from his body. Little Skull cultivated in demonic arts, and his soul was vastly different from an ordinary person's. With Han Shuo's detailed explanation, he quickly grasped the trick. Little Skull tried many times, and within 3 days, he was able to separate a strand of his soul according to Han Shuo's instructions. The speed was faster than Han Shuo had imagined. "Good, very good." Han Shuo was overjoyed. He was very satisfied with Little Skull's aptitude. He hastily said, "As long as you can separate a part of your soul, the rest will be much easier." The most crucial part has been accomplished. Now, I will explain to you how to sever the connection between the soul and the main soul and ensure that the soul is connected to the new body. Outside the Pandemonium, Han Shuo's main body was refining puppets while his avatar explained to Han how the steps of attaching a new body to him. Underground, Han Shuo's other avatar that cultivated in the energy of death was constantly learning about the situation in the fringe through Zovik's information. 3 are dead. The other two were also visited by the overgod of death, but since they didn't use any aggressive methods, they came out unscathed. Zovik reported the latest news to Han Shuo with a solemn face. During this period of time, Han Shuo had Zovik keep an eye on those who had been reported by Log. More than half of these fringe experts who cultivated in the energy of death had been visited by the overgod of death. Those who were not aware of the situation and were used to being domineering were naturally killed by the overgod of death. As for those who felt the terror of the overgod of death and chose to submit to him, they were friendly like Log and were not killed. How many more have he not visited? Han Shuo bunched his brows and asked, "There are still 5 people left. Once these 5 have been found, I believe he will target Han Hao. It looks like it won't be long. Should we prepare ahead of time?" Zovik asked for Han Shuo's opinion. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo instructed, "The death of a few experts cultivating in the Edict of Death in the Fringe will surely cause a commotion. Send someone to spread the news that an expert god hunter is hunting the experts cultivating in the Edict of Death in the Fringe. Exaggerate his strength, but don't mention that he is an overgod with a quintessence, lest it causes a panic. Also, make sure to spread the news to the remaining 5. But remember, don't let them know that the news came from us." So he wants to instill fear in the hearts of those 5 so that they can hide and buy themselves more time? Zovik immediately understood Han Shuo's plan. Han Shuo nodded and said in a deep voice, "That's right. Buy as much time as you can. I will get it done soon. When the time comes, I will have Han Hao leave the pandemonium and head to the Omphalos. Everyone in the Omphalos will recognize his face. This way, the overgod of death will not suspect anything." Zovik had served Han Shuo wholeheartedly for many years and was well aware of every move in the Fringe. Han Shuo needed accurate information and therefore, he did not hide it from him. Han Shuo also believed that Zovik, having known the House of Han for so many years, would serve him with sincerity. "Understood. I'll get to it right away." Zovik nodded and left quietly without another word. After another 3 days, Han Shuo, who was in the gymnasium outside the pandemonium, let out a soft cry. With a wave of his hand, a body that looked exactly like Little Skull Han Hao emerged from the pool of blood. "Is everything clear?" asked Han Shuo solemnly as he looked at Little Skull. "I'm ready." The little skeleton took a deep breath. It was very calm and not nervous at all. Nodding in satisfaction, Han Shuo smiled and said, "Haha, you're even more powerful than I was back then. Sometimes, I wonder if you've never known fear. All right, get ready. Send your soul into the Omphalos and I'll leave it to you. The rest is up to you." Little skeleton didn't waste any more words. He sat cross-legged on the ground and stared fixedly at the other him with his bewitching eyes. Demonic radiance flickered in his pupils. A faintly discernible soul fluctuation formed above his head and drifted towards the other him that had no aura of life. The radiance in Little Skull's eyes grew more and more bewitching. The energy of death and the demonic arts on Little Skull's body fused together in a bizarre manner. All of a sudden, Little Skull's purple demon eye flickered, and he stood there dumbfounded. Han Shuo's heart skipped a beat. He stared at Little Skull's main body and then at the puppet he had made himself. He became more and more nervous. After a while, the Little Skull's purple demon eye flickered, and he slowly closed his eyes. The puppet opposite him slowly stood up and moved its limbs curiously. It said, "Father, I'm done." Han Shuo was overjoyed. He laughed and said, "Good, very good. Your main body will leave the Fringe immediately, and the rest will be easy. No matter how powerful the overgod of death is, we, father and son, will deceive him." Chapter 942. When Han Shuo appeared with 2 identical little skulls, the 5 elite zombies, Ballins, and the others were astounded. They released their souls to examine the little skull's life undulations and discovered that the 2 little skulls were almost identical except that Little Skull's soul contained a trace of bizarre energy of death. His soul contains the energy of the quintessence. Therefore, the 2 souls are somewhat different. But don't worry, the overgod of death can't see Han Hao's true body. He definitely won't be able to tell the difference between this half-completed avatar and the real one, said Han Shuo confidently. Father, shall I take my leave then? The two little skulls replied in unison. Their voices and intonation were exactly the same. As he was still not used to having two bodies, he couldn't act independently like Han Shuo. Therefore, his words were exactly the same. All right, go. One body will leave the fringe, and the other will go to the Omphalos. Remember, bring your subordinates with you. Don't be in a hurry to leave the Omphalos. It will be best if you stay in the Omphalos for a while and wait for the Overgod of Death to come looking for you, said Han Shuo smilingly. Got it. Little Skull nodded, indicating that he understood Han Shuo's words. Shortly after, he bid farewell to Scarlet and the 5 elite zombies and left through the underground tunnel of the Pandemonium. Han Shuo didn't go to the Omphalos with Little Skull because he didn't want to meet the Overgod of Death so soon. After all, he had killed Hill of Witherbone City in the Death Dominion. There was a grudge between him and the Overgod of Death. Something bad might happen if they met. On the other hand, it was because the body Little Skull sent to the Omphalos was just a half-completed avatar. Even if the Overgod of Death destroyed it, it wouldn't affect Han Shuo's true body in the slightest. Therefore, Han Shuo was not worried and allowed Little Skull to act alone. After the Little Skull left the underground, Ballins, Sanguiner, and Gilbert surrounded Han Shuo in high spirits, asking him about his avatar. It seemed that they were very curious about it and wanted to refine a secondary body for themselves. However, Han Shuo could not fulfill their wishes. Whether it was Ballins or Sanguiner, they did not practice the orthodox demonic path, so they could not divide their souls into several strands. Gilbert, on the other hand, could achieve this because when his soul was kept by Han Shuo had taught him a few ways to forge his soul power in order to prevent it from fading away. However, Gilbert's current body was already equivalent to an avatar. Whether it was in terms of strength or compatibility with his soul, it had reached a very good level. There was no need to waste energy to refine another avatar. Therefore, Han Shuo rejected their requests one by one. He then told them to focus on their own cultivation and not let this matter affect their state of mind. After the fire of hope in their hearts was extinguished by Han Shuo, they were not too depressed. Gilbert continued to focus on his own cultivation. He had gained a lot of inspiration from Little Skull. Recently, he had gained quite a bit of understanding in the aspect of fusing two types of energy. Now was the time to strike the iron while it was hot. Perhaps it was because they were stimulated by Little Skull's power, but Sanguiner and Ballins were cultivating in seclusion much more diligently than before. They were not affected by the avatars. The 5 elite zombies had each obtained a High God Divine Soul from Han Shuo. As they were living in unique life forms, the amount of memories they obtained from the High God Divine Souls far exceeded that of Stathome and the others. As unique life forms that specialized in the energy of one energy, the 5 elite zombies improved at an astonishing rate. As the war with the Godhunter Alliance was on the verge of breaking out, Han Shuo dared not to be careless. After Little Skull left, he would frequently summon Zovik and instruct him on some detailed arrangements for the upcoming war. Other than that, Han Shuo would mysteriously disappear for a few days at a time. It was as though he was preparing something. Time flew by and half a month went by in the blink of an eye. Han Shuo estimated that Little Skull's main body should have left the fringe by now, and that his avatar should have arrived at the Omphalos by now. Han Shuo was rather worried about the situation in the Omphalos. At the Omphalos in the fringe. Little Skull, Han Hao, and a few god hunters had officially entered the Omphalos. They swaggered around the streets of the Omphalos and shopped for some unique products. 5 days ago, Han Hao's avatar had arrived in the vicinity of the Omphalos. But because his main body had not left the fringe, he did not enter the Omphalos. It was only when the avatar's soul sensed that his main body had arrived in the Destiny Dominion that Han Hao unhurriedly entered the Omphalos. Han Hao's arrival had attracted the attention of many major powers. Tyre, who was well aware that Han Hao possessed a quintessence shard, immediately set his sights on Han Hao. He dispatched men to observe Han Hao's every move and had Wind Spirit spread the news of Han Hao's arrival. Han Hao's reputation in the fringe was second only to Han Shuo, Tyre, and Logue. The leaders of the major powers were very curious to see Han Hao in the fringe. They also quietly observed Little Skull's every move. Asura was the first to approach Han Hao. "Why have you come to the Amphalos?" Asura asked with his brows bunched. He pulled Han Hao into his sovereign shop and made sure that the perimeter of the Amphalos was sealed off. Asura knew the relationship between Little Skull and Han Shuo. He had spent a lot of effort to express his goodwill to Han Shuo. Naturally, he had to see it through to the end. When Nestet, the overgod of death, was entire sovereign shop, Asura had personally heard the names reported by Logue. As one of the 5 sovereigns of the fringe, Asura had learned through his own channels that some of the names reported had been killed. He had also sent the information to Zovik. Asura believed that Han Shuo should already know the severity of the situation and therefore did not understand why Little Skull would still appear in the Amphalos. "I'm here to take care of some matters. That fella didn't look for me." "I will be fine," Han Shuo said. Little Skull had communicated with Han Shuo before he came to the Amphalos. Little Skull's intelligence, other than being a little dull when it came to emotions, was enough for him to pretend to be courteous to someone like Asura. "Not you? Are you sure?" Although Asura did not know what was going on, he was certain that the overgod of death was looking for someone or something through the clues he had gathered over the past few days. He pondered for a moment before he asked. "It's not me," confirmed Little Skull. "That's good." Asura nodded before he changed the topic and asked, "How has Brian been lately?" "I have sent him quite a few messages asking him to come to the Amphalos for a meeting. Why hasn't he responded?" "He is in seclusion and is at a critical juncture. But don't worry, I have made all the necessary preparations. If the God Hunter Alliance really comes, we won't have any problems on our side," Han Hao said without hesitation. He had already discussed with Han Shuo. Asura then asked a few more questions about Han Shuo, to which Han Hao answered without hesitation. He did not reveal any secrets about the pandemonium, nor did he seem to be avoiding Asura. Asura did not get the answer he wanted from Little Skull. Seeing that Han Hao was not afraid of the overgod of death and was determined to stay in the fringe, Asura did not try to dissuade him. Fearing that the overgod of death would come looking for him because of Little Skull, Asura did not try to persuade Little Skull to stay. He told Han how to be careful and not to use forceful methods when dealing with the overgod of death. After thanking Asura, Little Skull left the sovereign shop with an indifferent face. He then continued to wander around the merchant streets, waiting for the overgod of death, Nestet. 3 days later, Little Skull brought Polo and the others to a shop that sold special bones. From time to time, he would ask the owner of the shop to show him some oddly shaped bones that contained strange energy. As a cultivator of the Edict of Death, Little Skeleton had a particular fondness for all kinds of bones. In the past, what he most wished to do was to collect bones and try to refine weapons for himself. He was very clear about the quality of bones. He could tell what kind of weapon a bone was most suitable to be forged with just one bone in his hand. The owner of the shop was obviously aware of Han Hao's identity. He was very respectful to Han Hao and took out all the best bones in the shop for Han Hao's inspection. He wore the sincerest smile on his face. Han Hao was very surprised by his good attitude. After walking around for half a day, Han Hao packed up the dozen or so bones in front of him and said to the shop owner, "I'll take these." "How much for them?" "How could I dare to accept your crystal coins?" "Haha, I'll give them to you," said the shop owner with a flattering smile. Han Hao stared blankly for a moment. He bunched his brows and coldly asked, "Why don't you accept crystal coins? Don't tell me you won't accept the same thing from others? How could others compare to you?" "Haha, as long as you show mercy in the future, this humble shop will be eternally grateful. In the future, you can come and pick any bone products you like," said the shop owner with an embarrassed smile. He seemed to be rather nervous. Han Hao was rather stunned. He looked at the humble shop owner with a puzzled expression. He did not quite understand what the shop owner meant. It was at this moment that Polo, who was standing beside Han Hao, let out a hollow laugh. He moved closer to Han Hao and whispered, "A few years ago, you instructed me to target all the shops that pass by. As for this shop, hee, I was the one who did it." Upon hearing this, Han Hao immediately understood. Some time ago, Tyre and Logue wanted to stop Han Shuo from entering the Amphalos. Therefore, they deliberately made things difficult for Han Shuo and forced the owners of the major shops in Tanai to join forces to stop Han Shuo from entering the Amphalos. As a result, some of the things that Han Shuo could not do fell to them. They looted all the goods from the shops that passed by, causing the owners of the Tanai shops to fall into a state of panic. "Oh, thank you." Han Shuo nodded indifferently. He did not stand on ceremony with this man and swaggered out of the shop with Polo and the others. As soon as he stepped out of the shop, Han Hao suddenly felt something. He had a feeling that he was being targeted by someone. This body of his was a half-finished product that Han Shuo had refined. Although his body was far inferior to his original body, his soul's sensitivity was still there. As soon as this strange feeling arose, Han Hao suddenly realized something. Just as Han Hao had expected, a faint silhouette wrapped in the mist-like energy of death quietly emerged from a corner of the commercial street. It drifted toward Han Hao at an unimaginable speed. As the mist-like silhouette approached, several energies of lightning, destruction, and darkness swarmed toward Han Hao at the same time, blocking off all directions around Han Hao. "It's finally here," Han Hao thought to himself. He stood still and waited for the energy of death to approach him. He had already decided to let the overgod of death's soul peep at him. Just as the misty shadow was about to reach him, to Han Hao's surprise, it stopped abruptly. At the same time, a cold voice came from within. "Lock him down, Dagmar," shouted Han Hao. In an instant, he retreated into the shop that sold bones and shouted, "Polo, disperse! Shout!" Han Hao was very surprised. He did not expect that it was not the overgod of death, Nested, but the hegemon of the God Hunter Alliance, Dagmar. This was the Amphalos at the center of the fringe. Tyre, Logue, Asura, and Wasis were all gathered there. The leaders of various factions were also there. Dagmar must be a little too crazy to come to the Amphalos. As a cultivator of the energy of death, Dagmar's mastery of the soul was much more profound than that of an average person. By deliberately concealing his strength, he might be able to fool Tyre and the others. After waiting bitterly for so many days, not only did Nestet not show up, but Dagmar, who had gone mad for the quintessence shard, showed up instead. Han Hao did not know whether to laugh or cry. He immediately retreated after entering the shop and did not forget to loudly instruct Polo. "The forces of the God Hunter Alliance are here. The forces of the God Hunter Alliance are here." Polo, of course, knew who Dagmar was. As someone who had pledged allegiance to Han Hao, he knew what he had to do. He shouted as he retreated with the others. "Where do you think you're going, Han Hao?" shouted Dagmar sinisterly. One after another, silhouettes emerged from the darkness and surrounded Han Hao from all directions. Dagmar, on the other hand, did not personally attack Han Hao. Instead, he waved his hand and released bone prisons to temporarily trap Polo and the others. After his previous experience, Dagmar had a knot in his heart about the bizarre energy of Little Skull's gravestone. He was afraid that if he attacked Han Hao, he would be affected by the gravestone's energy. Therefore, even though Dagmar was right beside Han Hao, he did not immediately attack. Of course, he did not know that Han Hao did not have the quintessence shard on him. Therefore, he did not dare to attack Han Hao. Instead, he temporarily imprisoned Polo and the other followers of Little Skull, so that those who did not cultivate in the energy of death could besiege Han Hao and kill him in the shortest time possible. "You still can't kill me," shouted Han Hao coldly after jumping out from the back window of the shop. Shortly after, he took out a handful of pearls of annihilation and threw them in all directions. Boom, 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 boom. Violent explosions rocked every corner of the merchant street. The few loyal followers of Dagmar were all blocked by the terrifying explosive force of the pearls of annihilation. One of them, who was the first to rush to Han Shua's side, was the first to be hit. He was blasted away with blood dripping from his body. Before coming here, Han Shua had given the little skeleton half of the pearls of annihilation. He had refined to the little skeleton in order to prevent the little skeleton from being ambushed along the way. Little Skull's fake body could not unleash too much energy of death. However, because his soul had inherited the memories of the demonic arts, he had no problem unleashing the pearls of annihilation. The violent explosion instantly destroyed more than a dozen shops in the vicinity. Rubble, dust, wood chips, and iron pillars flew everywhere. The shop assistants and the fringe dwellers who were shopping in the area were all out of luck. Those who stood close to Little Skull were all blasted away by the pearls of annihilation. "Capture him! Capture him! We don't have much time!" shouted Dagmar ferociously as he rushed to the front of Han Hao. He opened one of his hands and wisps of the energy of death drifted out and landed on the bone prison, imprisoning Polo and the others. The sharp bone spikes shrank and pierced deep into the bodies of Polo and the others. Dagmar was, after all, an overgod expert. It was no surprise that he would attack Polo and the others. And this was only because Dagmar's attention was focused on Han Hao. Otherwise, if Dagmar had gone all out, Polo and the others would have been in an even more miserable state. They might have been stabbed to death by the bone prison by now. Dagmar's mad shouts caused his loyal followers to disregard the impact of the explosions and charge at Han Hao fearlessly. It seemed that they were determined to kill Han Hao as soon as possible. Almost all of Dagmar's followers possessed late-stage high god strength. The explosions from the Pearls of Annihilation wouldn't be able to instantly kill them. But when they recklessly charged at Han Hao, this half-finished avatar of Han Hao's wouldn't be able to withstand their attacks. However, Han Hao wasn't particularly worried because he knew that even if this body was destroyed, it wouldn't affect his main body. If this body were to die in Dagmar's hands, Han Hao would be able to dispel the overgod of death's suspicions of him. Although the process wasn't ideal, Han Hao would still be able to indirectly achieve his goal. 5 shadows swarmed forward and instantly blocked off Little Skull's path of retreat. 5 energies locked onto Han Hao's body in an instant, immobilizing Han Hao's body. "Commander, he's under control," cried one of Dagmar's followers who cultivated in the energy of darkness. Dagmar was overjoyed. His body trembled with excitement. He didn't even look at Polo, who was about to be killed by the bone prison, nor did he waste the energy of death on Buello. He landed in front of Han Hao in an instant and extended his hand towards Han Hao's chest. "Here. It should be here," Dagmar mumbled to himself with a crazed look on his face. His fingernails were as white as a sharp knife. Puff. Dagmar thrust one of his hands into the chest of Han Hao's body. He was so excited that he was about to dig out the quintessence shard that had driven him crazy. Suddenly, Dagmar stopped. His face was hideous. He stared at Little Skull and roared, "It's not here. Why isn't it here? Where did you hide it? Hand it over. Hand it over." Chapter 943. Dagmar snuck into the Omphalos at all costs. He was prepared to be severely injured or even killed. But why? It was all for the quintessence shard in Han Hao's body. Greed had destroyed his rationality and made him come here in a frenzy. He could give up on his subordinates who had been following him all this time. But for the quintessence shard, Dagmar had completely lost his mind. When he found no trace of the quintessence shard in Han Hao's body, he became hysterical. He grabbed Han Hao's chest and howled, "Hand it over! Hand it over!" Han Hao looked at the deranged Dagmar with an indifferent face. There was no sadness, no joy, no shock, no fear. It was as though Dagmar was grabbing someone else, and he was just an indifferent bystander. "Commander, someone is coming. Hurry." That subordinate heard the shrill howls from afar and knew that the experts of the fringe were gathering here. He hastily warned Dagmar when he saw that Dagmar had lost his mind. "Han Hao, hand it over and I won't kill you. I promise, I won't kill you." Dagmar's eyes were as red as blood as he held onto Han Hao tightly as he yelled, enunciating each word. "Just kill me," said Han Hao coldly. "Do you really want to die?" Dagmar bellowed. The veins on his forehead bulged. He was in a dilemma. On one hand, he wanted nothing more than to tear Han Hao into pieces. On the other hand, he wanted to know the whereabouts of the quintessence shard from Han Hao. "Commander, we're running out of time." The voice of one of his loyal subordinates was already sobbing, for Dagmar's usual composure was nowhere to be found. and he had stayed far longer than he had expected. "Fine, I'll fulfill your wish," Dagmar roared. He steeled his heart and prepared to kill Han Hao. All of a sudden, a frigid aura enveloped the entire area. The white, frigid aura instantly fell on Dagmar's body and completely enveloped him. The bone-chilling power immediately affected Dagmar, causing his limbs to stiffen and making him unable to exert his strength for a moment. At the same time, the frigid aura rapidly spread from Dagmar to the surroundings. Dust, gravel, and wood were all frozen. Dagmar's aura that had locked onto Han Hao suddenly broke. The frigid aura seemed to have a life of its own. It affected Dagmar, his subordinates, and even inanimate objects. However, it spared the little skull, Han Hao, in Dagmar's hand. Han Hao, who had been prepared to be killed by Dagmar's attack, keenly grasped this rare opportunity. The moment Dagmar and his subordinates were trapped by the frost energy, he immediately retreated and fled from Dagmar's side without a care for anything else. Although Dagmar's hand had reached into Han Hao's chest, it didn't take his life. This was because Dagmar knew that the quintessence shard was his main target. When his other hand reached into Han Hao's abdomen and discovered that there was no trace of the quintessence shard, he immediately withdrew his hand without destroying Han Hao's body. Of course, due to the uniqueness of this body, Han Hao wouldn't die so easily even if Dagmar crushed his internal organs. He would still be able to live on peacefully. After all, this body was different from a normal human's. It was not as if all the internal organs in the body had exploded and all the body's functions would stop. "Dagmar, how dare you come to the Omphalos? You're courting death." A cold and stern voice sounded from not far away. Wasis, one of the 5 sovereigns of the Fringe, was the first to arrive. He managed to free Han Hao from Dagmar's grasp just in time. As soon as Wasis finished shouting, he appeared in front of Dagmar. An enormous domain of divinity instantly enveloped the entire area. A frigid aura several times colder than that of an ice cave descended. Even the ground seemed to have been frozen and cracked. Bone-chilling cracking sounds could be heard. Dagmar's momentary lapse in concentration gave Wasis the opportunity to attack his body with the frigid aura. However, Dagmar was an overgod just like Wasis. His strength was well known in the God Hunter Alliance. Although Wasis's frigid aura had injured him in an instant, the frigid aura also allowed Dagmar to recognize the situation. After circulating the energy of death in his body a few times, the frigid aura that had invaded his body was cleansed by Dagmar. He extended his hand, and the element of death from the Omphalos frantically converged towards him. A dusky mist immediately enveloped the area and neutralized the frigid aura, causing the temperature to rise. "Hegemon, run!" shouted one of Dagmar's subordinates at the top of his lungs. It was at this moment that Dagmar realized how dangerous the situation was. Other than Wasis, he sensed that Asura, a cultivator of the energy of earth, was also rushing over. Tyre and Logue's auras were faintly discernible. They shouldn't be too far away. If he couldn't escape from the Omphalos before the 4 of them surrounded him, it was very likely that he would be trapped in the Omphalos for the rest of his life. He gritted his teeth and took out a green crystal ball. He shouted, "Let your souls fly out." Those subordinates of Dagmar were delighted to hear that. Without hesitation, they released their divine souls from their bodies and flew into the green crystal ball in Dagmar's hand. As soon as their souls entered the green crystal ball, Dagmar waved his hand and released a few strands of the energy of death into the divine bodies of his subordinates. As soon as the energy of death entered their divine bodies suddenly swelled up. A surge of deathly stillness kept growing in their bodies. Their divine bodies were like balloons that slowly grew bigger and bigger. Wasis, who was planning to stop Dagmar with all his might, was horrified to see the divine bodies suddenly rising into the sky and expanding. He immediately retreated and shouted, "Get out of the way!" Little Skull Han Hao, who was not far from Dagmar, hastily retreated when he saw the divine bodies rising into the sky. As a cultivator of the energy of death, he knew that Dagmar was using the divine bodies of his high god subordinates to perform the corpse explosion art. Therefore, he was faster than anyone else. As expected, after Wasis shouted, the divine bodies of Dagmar's subordinates suddenly exploded. Intense energy of death was released from their bodies and soared into the sky. It instantly tore a hole in the boundary that enveloped the omphalos. Dagmar, with the green crystal ball in his hand, seized the opportunity to disappear from the omphalos in a flash. "Go after them!" shouted Wasis as he raised his head to look at the sky. Together with Wasis, the three figures rose into the sky at the same time. The boundary of the omphalos did not seem to hinder them at all. Han Hao raised his head to look at the sky and memorized the positions of the other three. Asura was the closest, only a few thousand meters away. Tyre and Log were about 10,000 meters away. Han Hao roughly guessed that Tyre and Log should be in the vicinity just now. As for Asura, Han Hao could not see anything wrong with him. However, he was rather surprised that Asura arrived so much later than Wasis. Wasis, why was he so fast? Why did he help me? Han Hao was rather puzzled. He could tell that Wasis had been protecting him. If it wasn't for Wasis's sudden arrival, if it wasn't for Wasis's timely sealing of the boundary with his frigid energy, this half-finished avatar would have been torn to shreds by Dagmar. Logically speaking, Wasis should not have cared about Han Hao's existence when he came to deal with Dagmar. Han Hao's frigid energy didn't seem to be giving him special treatment. After all, Wasis had no relationship with the Han family. Wasis had even been defeated by Han Shuo at the mouth of the volcano. No matter how Han Shuo looked at it, Wasis shouldn't have been so careful to protect Han Hao. "Chief, are you all right?" While Han Hao was pondering, Polo walked out of Dagmar's bone prison with blood all over his body and asked worriedly. Han Hao shook his head and calmly replied, "I'm fine. How about you guys?" Dagmar left early and did not continue to exert his energy on us. Therefore, we only suffered some light injuries. "There's no problem," Polo said to Han Hao in a relaxed manner while wiping the blood off his body. His face did not show the slightest sign of pain. Having stayed in the fringe for a long time and being a god hunter himself, injuries of this degree were nothing to Polo. Han Hao's other subordinates did the same. They stopped the bleeding as quickly as they could. After they were done, they sat cross-legged on the ground to recover the energy they had consumed. They wanted to use every second to stabilize their injuries and recover their strength. This was the code of conduct they had learned from Han Hao ever since they started following Han Hao. No matter when or where, they must maintain their strength at their peak so that they can deal with any ambushes that might come at them at any time. "It's good that you're all right. Let's all sit down and rest." Han Hao nodded and took the lead to sit cross-legged on the ground, ignoring Wasis and the others who were chasing after him. In Han Hao's opinion, this body wouldn't be of much help. Therefore, he did not participate in the battle. Dagmar had not hesitated to use the divine bodies of his top experts to perform corpse explosion. Moreover, he had done it so decisively that he had a backup plan. They were all over gods. Dagmar was fleeing with all his might while Tyre, Log, and the others did not come immediately because they wanted to see Dagmar get killed. Therefore, they were unable to surround Dagmar. In Han Hao's opinion, it was very likely that Dagmar would be able to escape in Tyre and the others would return empty-handed. Han Hao, who was sitting cross-legged, was still letting his imagination run wild. This body was only a half-finished product to begin with, and there was no need for it to recover. Now that the matter was over, the strand of his divine soul would return to his main body and he would have to give up on this half-finished body. Therefore, Han Hao did not plan to waste his energy on recovering this body. Why did Wasis help me? Did Asura betray me? Otherwise, why would he arrive even later than Wasis? A series of questions surfaced in Han Hao's mind. He knitted his brows and slowly pondered. Time passed without anyone noticing. When the fringe dwellers arrived, they discovered that Dagmar was nowhere to be found. Han Hao sat cross-legged on the ground without a care for his surroundings. Blood was still flowing out of his chest. Some of the fringe dwellers suddenly had other thoughts in their minds. Some of them couldn't help but harbor evil thoughts. Their gazes toward the little skeleton were a little strange. Han Hao had been roaming the fringe for a long time and had offended so many people that he had lost count. Those who bore grudges against him usually feared Han Hao's strength and dared not act recklessly. But today, It was obvious that Han Hao was gravely injured, and even his trusted subordinates, Polo, were covered in blood. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Some of the leaders of the Fringe did not know about the relationship between Han Hao and Han Shuo. Therefore, they stayed in the same spot with ferocious gazes. They observed Han Hao, Polo, and the others from the dark. It was obvious what they were thinking. The Amphalos has its own rules. For many years, no one has dared to attack Tanai in the Amphalos. Chapter 944. As Han Hao had expected, Tyre, Wasis, Log, and Asura returned empty-handed. They did not manage to surround and kill Dagmar. As soon as Dagmar left the Amphalos and was no longer restrained by the boundary, he immediately deployed a space-time scroll to escape. When Tyre and the others flew out of the Amphalos, they happened to see Dagmar tearing through space and leaving. The space-time rift was slowly closing up. The four sovereigns were a step too late and could only watch as Dagmar disappeared without a trace. However, Dagmar had paid a terrible price for his trip to the Amphalos. The divine bodies of his strongest high gods had all exploded, and he himself had been ambushed by Wasis. It could be said that after this incident, Dagmar's influence in the God-Hunter Alliance would be greatly reduced. They did not have to worry too much about Dagmar in the upcoming war against the God-Hunter Alliance. Dagmar had received his just deserts for coming to the Amphalos alone. When Tyre, Wasis, and the others returned to Han Hao's side, the overgod of death, Nestet, had left in disappointment. They did not know that while they were chasing after Dagmar, Han Hao had already finished what he needed to do. No matter what, Han Hao was a native of the Fringe. It was only natural that the four sovereigns would come to greet Han Hao after he was attacked by Dagmar in the Amphalos. "Han Hao, are you all right?" asked Asura softly. He seemed very worried. "I'm fine. How is Dagmar? Did you catch him?" asked Han Hao. He knew that the four sovereigns must not have found anything. However, he still had to ask what he needed to ask. Asura forced a smile and shook his head. He sighed and said that Dagmar is too ruthless. He used the divine bodies of his high god subordinates to perform the corpse explosion art and blew open the boundary of the Amphalos. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to leave the Amphalos by the time the four of us arrived and surrounded him. "I thought you guys were already here." Han Hao shot a meaningful glance at Tyre and Log before he said to Asura, "Yeah, I'm fine now. Just now, a strange guy came and looked at me with his soul." He shook his head and left. "I don't know who he is." Tyre and Log's expressions changed at the same time, and they looked at each other. Log suddenly laughed and asked Han Hao, "Who is so strange? He dared to use his soul to spy on you and still managed to leave safely. This is really surprising. According to my understanding of you, you are not a person who is easy to talk to." Wasis and Asura also turned their attention to Han Hao. It was obvious that they were very concerned about the matter. "I don't know who that person is, but I'm certain that the death energy he cultivates far surpasses yours." Han Hao looked coldly at Log and said calmly, "I know I have no way of contending against such a powerful person, so I can only choose to remain silent." I heard that some time ago, Lord Log also encountered a powerful expert. At that time, Lord Log's performance seemed to be even weaker than mine. Log's face turned ugly after hearing Han Hao's words. He coldly groaned and did not reply. Log was certain that the person who came was the overgod of death, Nestet. He did not learn from Tyre that Han Hao possessed a quintessence shard. Therefore, Log was not particularly surprised. Wasis and Asura did not think too much about it. They were just rather surprised that the overgod of death, Nestet, was able to learn that Han Hao was in the Amphalos in such a short period of time and came looking for him so quickly. Tyre, on the other hand, wore a pensive look. He looked deeply at Han Hao as though he was trying to see through Han Hao's body and soul. He was the one who knew about the Amphalos. Why didn't Nestet make a move? That's impossible. The quintessence shard is in his possession. Could it be that Big Brother's information is wrong? Tyre's mind was in turmoil. He thought that once Nestet arrived, Han Hao would be dead for sure. He did not expect that Han Hao would be fine. If there's nothing else, I'll be taking my leave. Han Hao did not feign civility with Tyre and the others. Han Hao had obtained the information he wanted from Tyre and Logue. Therefore, he stood up, nodded at Polo and said, "Let's go." Upon finishing those words, Han Hao took a step forward and left. Before he left, he stole a glance at Wazer, who was as cold as ice. "Let's disperse. Since Dagmar dared to come to the Omphalos alone, it seems that the God Hunter Alliance's attack will arrive soon. All right, everyone can leave now. We have said what we need to say. From today onwards, we will go our separate ways and prepare to face the God Hunter Alliance's attack." Tyre knew that the battle was about to break out. He was the first to leave after bidding farewell to Asura, Wasis, and Logue. As soon as Han Hao left the Omphalos, he brought Polo and the others to the sovereign shop where the Han family resided. Under the guise of buying Celestial Pearl, they entered the secret chamber where Han Shuo usually cultivated. The relationship between Han Shuo and Han Shuo was something that not even the average members of the House of Han were aware of. However, the owner of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy was privy to it. After Han Shuo arrived, he attentively escorted Han Shuo to his side and then quietly left. He also instructed all the employees to stay away from Han Shuo. The reason why Han Hao chose this secret chamber where Han Shuo usually cultivated was that Han Shuo had deployed a special formation to protect it. Inside the chamber, Han Hao would not have to worry about being spied on or disturbed by others. After sitting on the prayer mat where his father, Han Shuo, sat cross-legged, Han Hao gradually released a strand of his soul and completely concealed the aura of his body. At the same time, Han Hao's main body in the Destiny Dominion was also sitting cross-legged in the same posture. The only difference was that there were tiny inscriptions glowing in the pupils of Han Hao's eyes. His body was also emitting a strange energy that affected the element of death in the vicinity. Nestet, the overgod of death, who had yet to leave the Omphalos, was lost in his thoughts. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he looked in the direction of the Destiny Dominion. Han Hao was his last target. When he realized that Han Hao didn't have a quintessence shard on him, Nestor couldn't have been more disappointed. He started to wonder if he had made a mistake in his judgment. Why was it that all the experts of death in the Fringe couldn't find anything? The timely appearance of the quintessence shard from the Destiny Dominion shocked Nestet. His eyes glowed brightly as he mumbled, "So that guy has already left the Fringe. That's right. Why would he dare to stay in the Fringe when he sensed that I'm coming?" While mumbling to himself, Nestet swiftly left the Omphalos. The energy of the boundary that bound the entire Omphalos did not hinder him at all. With one thought, he passed through the boundary that enveloped the sky of the Omphalos and disappeared. He's finally gone. Tyre and Logue looked up at the sky and heaved a sigh of relief. The two of them were mainly responsible for deploying the energy of the sky above the Omphalos. Asura was in charge of the energy of the ground, and Wasis's energy of ice was used within the city walls. The four of them had a clear division of labor. As the ones who deployed the boundary, Tyre and Logue, of course, could sense the presence of the overgod of death. They knew that Nestet had disappeared from the Omphalos. To Tyre and Logue, Nestet's presence made them feel very insecure. Having such a powerful being in Tanai made them feel uneasy, as though their lives were in someone else's hands. For experts like Tyre and Logue who had the lives of others in their hands, this feeling of defeat was unbearable. They desperately hoped that the overgod of death would leave the Omphalos and the Fringe as soon as possible. They hoped that he would never appear in the Omphalos again. Tyre took a deep breath and slowly calmed himself down. After a while, he left the Omphalos and returned to the volcano. He contacted his brother Daka and told him about what happened today. "I got it. Dagmar has just returned, and he said that Han Hao no longer has the aura of the quintessence shard on him. This is really strange. I wonder what that kid did to the quintessence shard." Daka, who was in the magical mirror, had a puzzled look on his face. He couldn't figure out what was going on. Logically speaking, no matter who obtained the quintessence shard, they would hold it tightly in their hands and not let it go easily. However, there was clearly no quintessence shard in Han Hao's body. This was really hard to explain. Forget it. Let's not worry about Han Hao for now. Daka frowned and asked, has the over-god of death left? He should have. He searched everyone, and since he didn't find anything, I don't think there's a need for him to stay in the fringe any longer. I paid attention just now and roughly sensed that he went to the Destiny Dominion. I think he might have gone to ask the goddess of destiny about this, Tyre explained after pondering for a moment. That's good too. Daka nodded and smirked. Then, we can move out. Get ready. Tomorrow, we will officially attack the God Hunter Alliance. You will have to deal with the God Hunters from the dominions of wind and lightning. They are the weakest, so don't worry too much. Just be careful. As for Brian's side, Hehe, Dagmar, Acer, and Salas will be there. I will raise that place to the ground. Haha, after this battle, us two brothers will become the most powerful people besides the 12 core gods. Tyre laughed loudly, his face filled with arrogance and pride. In the Dominion of Destiny, the little skull, Han Hao, could clearly sense the overgod of death, Nestet, rushing over from the fringe. He smirked and thought, even if you're the overgod of death, you still fell for my father's trick. You should have eliminated me from your list of suspects, right? As long as I'm careful in the future, you'll never know who has the quintessence shard. When I completely fuse the quintessence shard with demonic arts, I'll take your quintessence. Sensing Nestet's arrival, Han Hao hid his energy again and slowly stood up, preparing to take a detour back to the fringe. At that moment, a petite figure suddenly appeared in front of Han Hao and looked at Han Hao in astonishment. Did you release that energy just now? Han Hao stared blankly for a moment before his expression turned cold. He first looked around cautiously before he asked, who are you? Han Hao sensed a strange soul undulation from the girl. It was a soul even more powerful than that of Polo and the others. She seemed to have a unique life form that made Han Hao feel threatened. My name is Andrina. This is the Dominion of Destiny, my home. Andrina stared coldly at Han Hao, bunched her brows, and sensed for a moment. Suddenly, her expression changed. She sneered and said, you have the aura of a god hunter on you. Are you a god hunter? That's right. I'm a god hunter. What do you want? Han Hao raised his bone spear in his hand and put on a vigilant face. As long as you're a god hunter, I don't care who you are. Andrina's face was as cold as ice. Her little hand suddenly blossomed with dazzling crystalline radiance and blasted at Han Hao. Han Hao was rather surprised. He did not sense any energy from any of the 12 fundamental energies from Andrina. That dazzling radiance contained the purest energy of energy crystals. It felt as though an enormous energy crystal cannon had been fired. Not only was it terrifying, but it was also very agile. Chapter 945. Angelina was still alive and kicking in the 3 enchantments of death. Hypocrisy, fear, and aging did not befall her at all. On her chest, a dazzling bright light aura lit up the entire area. Even the scorching sun's rays were not as bright and dazzling. The huge energy crystal was like a glazed crystal ball. In the center, there was an oval-shaped light ball that was constantly emitting a dazzling radiance. It corresponded with the dazzling radiance on Andrina's chest. It carried an astonishing amount of energy as it rolled towards Han Hao. Seeing that Andrina was still alive and kicking inside the 3 boundaries of death, Han Hao immediately changed his strategy. He instantly absorbed the elements of death that were supporting the 3 boundaries of death into the bone spur in his hand. Without waiting for the crystal ball to approach, Han Hao suddenly retreated. You want to run? Andrina sneered. She opened her small hand and flicked her slender fingers. Under Andrina's control, the glazed crystal ball rolled and bounced nimbly. It was as fast as lightning. It firmly locked onto Han Hao and didn't let go. Han Hao's heart was as calm as still water. His pair of bewitching eyes glittered with evil light. He suddenly stood still in his place. Caw-caw, caw-caw. 7 bone spurs shot out from his back and attacked the sneering Andrina from his side. At the same time, the bone spur in his hand suddenly shot out. As soon as the bone spur shot out, tens of thousands of ghosts wailed. Wisps of ink-black aura lingered on the bone spur, forming a hideous and frightening ghost face. The bone-chilling cold wind pierced through the bones, and the bone-piercing bones suddenly opened a big mouth full of sharp teeth. The bone spur, which was originally just a dead object, suddenly turned into a ferocious and terrifying ancient beast. The evil aura, which was condensed by hundreds and thousands of evil souls, showed its sharp edge at this moment. Andrina's sneering face suddenly changed. She seemed to be somewhat shocked. It seemed that she didn't expect that an ordinary bone spur would contain such frightening evil power. Without waiting for Andrina to react, the bone spur suddenly opened its big mouth filled with fangs and swallowed the glazed crystal ball that Andrina had shot out. That big mouth continued to chew and chew, making ka-ka-ka-ka sounds, as if the energy crystal that was as hard as a diamond was being bitten to pieces. So-so-so. So-so-so-so-so. The 7 bone thorns whistled over, and the cold and sinister power instantly enveloped the shocked Andrina. Before the bone thorns arrived, the sinister power had already been activated. Andrina was even more astonished. At this moment, she no longer looked at the crystal ball that had turned into a living creature and immediately focused her attention on the 7 bone spurs that had quietly arrived. A huge energy crystal light was released from Andrina's chest. In a split second, Andrina turned into a crystalline state, like a complete living fossil, sparkling and translucent, beautiful and magnificent. However, it didn't have the vitality that a life should have. A blinding light was released from Andrina's body, and the halo of light seemed to contain waves of astonishing power that seemed to affect the structure of space. The 7 bone spikes had clearly reached Andrina's side, but they just couldn't find an accurate point of attack. They just kept circling around Andrina. Who are you? Why is there an aura on your body that I'm familiar with? The crystallized Andrina still had a cold expression as she stared at Han Hao, who had grabbed the bone spur from afar. Han Hao didn't like to talk too much when dealing with enemies. He didn't say a word as he swept over to Andrina. As he advanced, he fiercely swung the bone spur in his hand that had grown much larger. As he swung his arm, thumb-sized energy crystals were shaken out of the bone spur. Those small energy crystals no longer had any energy fluctuations after being shaken out of the bone spur, becoming the most ordinary of pebbles. The crystal ball that had been swallowed by the bone spur couldn't continue to obtain energy from Andrina's body. Under the wear and tear of the thousands of souls and the power in his body, the only path left was to exhaust its energy. Who are you? I don't want to target the wrong person. When Andrina saw Han Hao rushing over, her expression turned cold as she shouted again. Han Hao still didn't say a word. However, he didn't stop the bone spur in his hand as he threw it with all his might. The 7 bone spurs that had shot out from Han Hao's back hovered around Andrina, unable to find a target to attack Andrina. However, the bone spur that contained thousands of souls seemed to be unaffected by the strong light around Andrina's body. It pierced through the layers of light, heading straight for Andrina's chest. Andrina's expression changed again. The glaring light curtain suddenly disappeared from her side. She took out a compass decorated with a pattern of stars. As soon as the compass appeared, it flew out with life. Dong! The compass hit Han Hao's bone spur. A strange power flowed from the compass into the bone spur. The souls that were entrenched in the compass trembled violently. In the next moment, they turned into wisps of smoke and dissipated between heaven and earth. A strange light flashed in Han Hao's eyes. Without thinking, he raised his hand and summoned the bone spur back. With a thought, he planned to use the power of the Godhead fragment and the demonic arts to fight Andrina. Sure Yin could feel the strange fate power on that compass. He had rarely encountered this kind of power before. He knew that it was the most mysterious of the 12 Upanishads. The power on that compass was so terrifying that the souls in his bone thorns couldn't endure it. After making up his mind, Han Hao didn't hesitate. He retrieved all the bone spurs and charged straight at Andrina. This body was extremely tough to begin with. He had spent much more time and energy on this body than he had on the bone spurs. Now that this body contained a shard of Godhead that was related to the power of death, he had improved even further. It could be said without the slightest bit of politeness that this body had already become his most secretive weapon. In some aspects, its power was even more terrifying than the bone spear in his hand. As soon as Han Hao moved, Andrina knew that he was going to fight with his life on the line. That was because no matter how they fought before, Han Hao's face was calm. It was as if he didn't care about her. But this time, he was very focused. He was much more serious than before. When it came to Han Hao, Andrina had a deep fear in her heart. The power Han Hao displayed made her feel a strong sense of crisis. Just like now, if it wasn't for the compass her mother had given her, she might have been injured by the bone spur. So, seeing that Han Hao was going to fight with his life on the line, Andrina was a little anxious. Just as Han Hao was about to reach her, she suddenly shouted, "Do you know Brian?" Han Hao, who was flying over, suddenly froze. His body stopped a dozen meters in front of Andrina. He looked at Andrina strangely and nodded. "Who are you? How do you know my father?" Hearing this, it was Andrina's turn to be surprised. She exclaimed, "What? You are his son? How is that possible?" Landing on the ground, Han Hao calmly looked at Andrina and said, "Are you my father's friend or foe?" "Of course we are friends. I was just about to find your father. Can you take me to him?" Andrina giggled. Although she still found it strange, she didn't show it on her face. Han Hao didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he looked at Andrina attentively, as if trying to determine if Andrina was telling the truth. After a while, Han Hao said, "My father is in the pandemonium. Go there and find him. I still have things to do." Then, without another word, Han Hao turned around and left without looking at Andrina. He could sense that the overgod of death, Nestet, was rushing towards him at full speed. He couldn't stay here for too long. On the other hand, if he didn't take a detour to the fringe, he would very likely run into the overgod of death, Nestet. If he ran into Nestet on the way, he would be in serious trouble. Before Angelina could say anything, Han Hao had already disappeared without a trace. With a dejected face, she gritted her teeth and cursed in a low voice, "What's the big deal? Do you think I don't know this place?" Andrina looked in the direction where Han Hao had disappeared. Her eyes glistened for a moment before she muttered, "The energy that attracted me to him was obviously from the quintessence shard of death. He didn't even use his full strength." I heard that the overgod of death, Nestet, has come to the fringe. Could it be because of him? Andrina hesitated for a moment before she harumphed, "Forget it. If it wasn't for Brian, I would have told him." Andrina stomped her foot and glared in the direction where Han Hao had left. Then, she turned around and flew towards the fringe. The Destiny Dominion, the Shrine of Destiny. The goddess of Destiny's figure slowly materialized in the shrine. "Andrina, I've brought you something. It's your favorite crystal," said the goddess of Destiny with a benevolent face. Her gentle voice reverberated throughout the shrine. After a long while, the goddess of Destiny forced a smile and shook her head. She muttered to herself, sneaking away again. Why couldn't this lass just stay put and behave herself? But this time, she shouldn't be too far away. Haha, this girl's strength has improved tremendously recently. She shouldn't have any problems. The goddess of Destiny cast her gaze towards the land of chaos. Her eyes seemed to have two compasses dotted with stars spinning slowly in them. She looked more like a precise machine than a human with flesh and blood. "Hanshua, oh Hanshua, I hope the power he left you will be able to help us open Eternia," murmured the goddess of Destiny as she gazed at the fringe. The fringe, the pandemonium. Hanshua, who was in closed-door cultivation, suddenly felt uncomfortable. He flew out of his gymnasium and stood on top of the pandemonium. He gazed in the direction of the Dominion of Destiny and mumbled, "Han Hao is there. Did something happen to him?" With that thought in mind, he wondered if he should go to the Dominion of Destiny to take a look. He trusted his soul's intuition. At this moment, Zovik came to his side and said respectfully, "My lord, we have news." "Oh?" Han Shua put on a faint smile and asked, "News from the Omphalos?" Zovik nodded and replied, "There was an accident along the way, but the outcome was as you expected, my lord." I have received reliable information that the Overgod of Death did not attack young Master Han Hao. He has probably left the Omphalos or the Fringe. Zovik first told Han Shuo about the results and then went into detail, emphasizing the sudden arrival of Dagmar. Dagmar was so tempted by the quintessence shard that he dared to sneak into the Omphalos. Humph, if it weren't for Logue and Tyre, Dagmar wouldn't have been able to leave this place alive. Although Han Shuo wasn't present at the scene, he was able to more or less guess the truth from Zovik's description. The divine bodies of Dagmar's most capable subordinates have been destroyed. Even though Dagmar has taken away their divine souls, it will be very difficult for them to recover. After this battle, Dagmar is no longer a threat, said Zovik smilingly. Never underestimate a man who has gone mad. Han Shuo was not as optimistic as Zovik. Instead, he solemnly reminded Zovik, pay close attention to Dagmar. An overgod who has lost his mind will do things that we cannot anticipate. Tell Tanai's subordinates not to leave the Omphalos for the time being. Yes, my lord, replied Zovik solemnly. All right, you may leave now, said Han Shuo with a nod. He then gestured for Zovik to leave. After Zovik left, Han Shuo looked in the direction of the Destiny Dominion and mumbled to himself. Since it has nothing to do with Han Hao, what was that feeling just now? The Destiny Dominion. The Destiny Dominion is the territory of Andrina's mother. Did something happen to Andrina? That's impossible. Who would dare to touch her in the Destiny Dominion? After thinking for a while, Han Shuo was unable to come up with any conclusions. He put aside his chaotic thoughts for the time being and got ready to deal with the God Hunter Alliance's impending attack. The Overgod of Death had retreated from the Fringe. Without that terrifying existence who could affect both sides, there was no longer any hindrance to the delayed battle. Han Shuo knew that the God Hunter Alliance would soon attack the Pandemonium. On this day, on top of a barren mountain outside the Fringe, the 12 hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance were gathered together. The 12 hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance were gathered in one place. At the foot of the desolate mountain was a dense crowd of God Hunters with cold glints in their eyes. Based on a rough estimate, there were at least 10,000 of them. All these years, the 12 hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance had never gathered together like this. They had never had the opportunity to unite against a single faction. A benevolent-looking old man wearing the priestly white robes of the Temple of God of Light smiled and gestured for everyone to listen to him. Judas, why are you still wearing that shabby priestly robe? Hee, do you really think that you can return to the embrace of the God of Light? Daka looked at Judas, the hegemon of the Light Dominion, with a teasing look on his face. If he could return to the embrace of the God of Light, I would have been summoned back by the Shrine of Ice. Hegemon Tuckamore from the Domain of Water sneered. Judas laughed awkwardly and explained, it was the God of Light who abandoned me. Actually, I'm still very willing to serve the God of Light. If the God of Light can forgive me, I might really be willing to return to his side. Haha, return to the side of the God of Light? What for? Ambush him again? Laughed Daka brazenly. He cupped his fists at Judas and said in admiration, as one of the keepers of light, I'm truly impressed that you could do such a thing. Among all of us, there's really no one who's stronger than you. What's even more surprising is that you're actually still alive. You flatter me, said Judas humbly. He bowed towards the void and sincerely said, Praise be to the God of Light. I will do my best to survive until the day your quintessence leaves your body. All right, I'm not interested in your nonsense. Let's move out. Dagmar, who was sitting on his bone throne, coldly snorted. He wasn't interested in listening to their chatter. Dagmar, you're the most courageous of all. You charged into the Fringe's main camp without anyone noticing and gave us a boost of morale. Haha, if we win this battle, it's all thanks to you. Laughed Regis from the Domain of Thunder. But if you can kill Tyre, Wassies, and Logue at the same time, I'll be even more impressed. Hee, then all we have to do is clean up the mess, don't you think? Regis, do you think that you can defeat me now? Dagmar straightened his body on his bone throne and said, Do you want to try? If I could defeat you 400 years ago, I can do it again today. I'm really interested. Regis grinned and stood up abruptly. It seemed that he really wanted to fight Dagmar. The reason why the God Hunter Alliance hadn't been united for so many years was because of the grudges between them. Whenever they met, they would mock each other and dig at each other's scars. Stop talking. Let's kill those fringe dwellers first. When the time comes to divide the territory, you two can do whatever you want, said Judas smilingly. Then, he raised his voice and said, All right, let's get back to business. Let's see how we should attack from different directions. I'll attack Brian's side. I don't care about the rest. Dagmar grunted and squeezed his body back into his bone throne. He had suffered great losses in the Omphalos and hadn't been able to obtain the quintessence shard from Han Hao. He had long viewed Han Hao as a thorn in his side and was determined to get rid of Han Hao and force him to reveal the quintessence shard's whereabouts. Although he didn't know why Han Hao didn't have the quintessence shard, he had personally witnessed the existence of the gravestone. So, he wouldn't leave like the overgod of death. He would definitely keep his eyes on Han Hao until he obtained the quintessence shard and crushed Han Hao to dust. I'm familiar with Acer and Dagmar. The two of us should work with him to deal with Brian and the Pandemonium, suggested Daka, glancing at Acer. Acer and Daka seemed to have discussed this beforehand as they nodded in agreement. Is the Han family worth the three of you working together to deal with? Tuckamore of the Water Dominion coldly snorted. He didn't seem too satisfied with this arrangement and felt that Daka's side had taken advantage of the situation. The Han family is indeed very powerful. I know that I've fought them before. Also, Dagmar's strength has been greatly reduced. I think there's nothing wrong with the three of us working together, said Daka and Tuckamore while looking at Judas. After thinking for a moment, Judas smiled and said, All right then. Tuckamore and Dagmar are already so unlucky. Let them go. Although Tuckamore had spoken sarcastically to Judas, he seemed to be giving him face. He nodded and didn't say anything else. The matter was settled. Chapter 946. With Judas and Daka's help, the God Hunter Alliance slowly came to a decision. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer would head towards the Han family's Pandemonium. Tuckamore and Judas would head towards Logue. Regis, Miller, and Isaiah would deal with Asura, and the remaining hegemons would deal with Tyre and Wasis. All in all, the 12 hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance were clearly stronger than the Fringe. Given the God Hunter Alliance's strength, the 5 sovereigns of the Fringe wouldn't stand a chance against them. After the decision was made, the 12 hegemons gathered their subordinates and split into 5 groups, heading towards the Fringe from 5 different directions. On Daka's side were Acer and Dagmar, 3 overgod experts. Even though Dagmar had expended a lot of his energy, Acer and Daka still had plenty of experts under their command. With Salus leading the way, it was clear that they had the upper hand in this attack on the Pandemonium. After splitting up with the other hegemons and heading towards the Han family's Pandemonium for a while, Salus suddenly said, The Pandemonium where the Han family resides is protected by many powerful barriers. Tanai is shrouded in poisonous mist all year round, making it very difficult to deal with. Back when I led my subordinates to attack the Pandemonium, Brian wasn't there. Even so, I suffered heavy losses and failed to destroy the Pandemonium. The battle was about to begin and information was of utmost importance. Daka and Acer listened attentively to Salus's recount of the Pandemonium situation. Dagmar was the only one who seemed a little distracted. His eyes glowed with venomous light like a viper's. Before Salus could finish, Dagmar interrupted, Salus, it's just a small valley. No matter how many barriers there are, can it withstand the 4 of us? I don't know, but after I entered the valley, I was trapped by a strange power for a long time. In the past, Salus had always been wary of Dagmar. But ever since Dagmar's personality had changed due to the quintessence shard, Salus had started to look down on him. In Salus's eyes, Dagmar, who couldn't think calmly, was crazy, but he wasn't afraid of him. A strange power? Dagmar sneered. His snake-like eyes glanced at Salus and ridiculed. Salus, don't tell me you're too weak? How can the power of a valley trap an overgod like you? Salus snorted in displeasure and said angrily, Dagmar, It's up to you whether you believe me or not. I'm just narrating my experiences. In any case, I don't have many people participating in this operation. Don't blame me for not reminding you when your men die. Dagmar, we fought Brian in the Misty Sea. You should know that he's different from us. Also, you've known Han Hao for a long time, and you fought him before. You should know that Han Hao has some kind of energy that we don't understand, right? Daka said solemnly, this time. Not only do we have to destroy Pandemonium and kill Brian, Han Hao and the others, we can't afford to lose too much. You know how cunning Gandalf is. If we lose too much power in the Han family, we'll be at a disadvantage when it comes to splitting the profits. So, let's just listen to Salus's suggestion. Dagmar let out a sinister chuckle. You're right. Dagmar looked at Salus and said apologetically, please continue. I'll listen carefully. Hee. Salus nodded reluctantly. After thinking for a moment, he continued, Pandemonium isn't an ordinary place. I'm just telling you in advance so that you won't be at a disadvantage if you're unprepared. Apart from that, I've also found out that there's an area near Pandemonium where Han Hao, Godhunter subordinates, are stationed. It's very close to Pandemonium, but the security there isn't as tight as in Pandemonium. Dagmar's body stiffened when he heard Han Hao's name. He looked at Salus with his sinister eyes and asked, what do you suggest? Han Hao has a close relationship with the House of Han. I think we should go to his place first and see if we can destroy the place that isn't heavily guarded. Don't underestimate Han Hao's power. He has gathered all the God Hunters in the Fringe and has the most experts under the 5 sovereigns, explained Salus. All right, we'll go to Han Hao's place first, said Dagmar rather impatiently. His main target this time was the Quintessence Shard in Han Hao's possession. Compared to the temptation of the Quintessence Shard of Death, he didn't care about the Fringe's future profits at all. Salus, you're more familiar with the Fringe. Will there be any problems? Asked Daka with a frown. Salus's suggestion slightly conflicted with his plan. But seeing how impatient Dagmar was, he knew that Dagmar would definitely head there first. Although Salus's suggestion was different from his own, it didn't seem to be a problem. No matter how resourceful Daka was, he would never have guessed that Salus had already met with Han Shua in secret and reached a tacit agreement. After all, it could be said that Salus was forced out of the Fringe by Han Shua. From Daka's point of view, there was an irreconcilable grudge between the two. He didn't think that Salus was only trying to destroy the Han family. I don't know if there'll be any problems, but I'm sure that the Fringe's defenses aren't as strong as Pandemonium's. If we suffer heavy losses there, I don't think we need to go to Pandemonium, said Salus. What do you think? Daka hesitated for a moment and looked at Acer. That works too. We'll use that place to warm up and see if we can find the Quintessence Shard for Dagmar, said Acer indifferently. That's great, hee. Dagmar chuckled. He found Acer to be much more pleasing to the eye. Let's do it then, Daka finally said. Daka made the final decision and asked Salus about the situation over there before instructing his subordinates to slightly change the direction of their advance. Pandemonium, the Han family, Zovik, Romont, Rose, the 5 elite zombies, Ballins, and the others were gathered together. Even Stadholm, Phoebe, and the others who had been busy absorbing energy from the crystal ball walked out of the gymnasium. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer, the 3 hegemons, are here with their God Hunters. Other than those 3, Salus might be following them. Zovik reported the situation to Han Shua with a solemn face. Hearing this news, everyone from the Han family had a solemn look on their faces. Even Gilbert, who was usually laughing and joking, fell silent. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer were all over God experts. If Salus was added to the mix, it would be equivalent to having 4 pinnacle experts. The Han family had never encountered such power before. Compared to those 4, Hill and Sha-Ti-O in Witherbone City weren't even worth mentioning. That's the situation. Han Shua swept his gaze across the crowd and said, from today onwards, seal off the Pandemonium. No one is allowed to leave without permission. If we don't leave the Pandemonium, won't the God Hunters circle around it and head straight for the Omphalos? Ermike was stunned for a moment before he asked, according to our agreement with Tyre, Aren't we supposed to be in charge of this direction? If we allow Daka and the others to bypass us and enter the Omphalos, the consequences will be dire. Don't worry, Daka will definitely come to the Pandemonium. His goal this time isn't to charge straight into the Omphalos, but to destroy us. Han Shuo smiled confidently and consoled Ermaik. Ermaik nodded after hearing what Han Shuo said. He had known Han Shuo for a long time. Just by looking at Han Shuo for a while, he knew that Han Shuo already had a plan in mind. Don't leave the Pandemonium. All we need to do is wait for Daka and the others to arrive. Han Shuo scanned their faces with his eyes and smilingly said, if they really intend to take a detour and go straight to Omphalos, then let them be. In any case, the House of Han in Omphalos has already received orders to evacuate the place. From what I see, you don't seem to care about the Omphalos at all, do you? Statholm, the old monster, asked with a smile after staring blankly for a moment. Haha. Han Shuo laughed heartily and said, so what if the Omphalos is destroyed? With Han Tu, Han Jin, and the others around, rebuilding the Omphalos won't be difficult at all. As for the Omphalos, what does that have to do with me? If they deserve to die, then let them die. Only those who survive will be qualified to be servants of the Han family in the future. Upon hearing that, Statholm the old monster and the others immediately realized that Han Shuo was ambitious. He seemed to be planning to use this opportunity to make the entire Omphalos part of the Han family's territory. Brian, you said that you were going to prepare medicines to increase our divine energy. Have you made any progress? Asked Statholm with a smile. My state of mind is sufficient. As long as my divine energy can keep up, I will be able to take another step forward. Don't worry, your medicines are already on the way. Hee. With so many god hunters coming to our doorstep, I will refine medicines that you will never be able to use. Han Shuo then calmly issued a few more orders, telling the Han family to be careful during this period of time. However, he did not elaborate on the details. In another valley not far from the Pandemonium, there were 3 mountains with figures moving about. They seemed to be busy with something. On top of a remote cliff, Han Hao attentively observed the people moving about the 3 mountains. From time to time, he would summon one of his subordinates and whisper a few instructions to them. Huge runes had been engraved on the 3 peaks at an unknown time. The runes were strangely shaped, and Han Hao's subordinates couldn't recognize a single one of them. They had no idea when the runes had appeared. All they could do was follow Han Hao's instructions and pour buckets of stinking black ink on the runes. When the black ink splashed on the strangely shaped runes, they gave off wisps of black smoke. However, the smoke did not disperse with the wind. Instead, it lingered around the runes. It was a very strange and mystical sight. In the center of the belly of the mountain, grooves were dug out and stuffed full of energy crystals. As soon as the energy crystals fell into the center of the grooves, they would immediately shine with the unique bright luster of energy crystals, releasing obvious energy that flowed along special pipes to every corner of the belly of the mountain. The 3 mountains looked completely different from before as Little Skull's subordinates busied themselves. They looked ghostly and sinister, giving off an indescribable sense of danger. Are you all right? Han Shuo suddenly stood beside Little Skull. He glanced at the wound on his chest and asked, I heard from Zovik that you encountered Dagmar first? Did Dagmar do anything to you? Little Skull waved his hand and gestured for his subordinates to leave before he replied. This body is only a half-finished product. I will have to abandon it sooner or later when my main body returns. It's fine. After a short pause, Little Skull turned to Han Shuo and said, Father, the first to arrive was Wasis. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment before he smilingly nodded and said, Very good. It seems that Wasis is quite reliable at critical times. After pondering for a moment, Han Shuo bunched his brows and asked, Tyre and Log, of course, want you dead. They won't show themselves even if they come. What about Asura? Did you notice anything unusual from him? Asura came a little late, but he seemed to be in a hurry to get here as well. I don't see anything wrong with him. I just feel that he's a little late. Little Skull replied, I got it. Han Shuo pondered for a moment before he turned to look at those who were busy on the three mountains. He smilingly said, Salus has brought them here. They should be on their way. Hee, they want to destroy our Han family? Let's give them a surprise. Father, do you know a little girl named Andrina? Little Skull suddenly asked. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment. He looked at Little Skull and asked, How do you know Andrina? Of course I know Andrina. We're on good terms. What's wrong? I've fought with her before. Seeing that Han Shuo was puzzled, Little Skull added, I fought with her using my main body in the Destiny Dominion. She's very powerful, and she has a divine weapon bestowed to her by an expert who cultivates in the Edict of Destiny. Little Skull then told Han Shuo about his encounter with Andrina. After Little Skull finished, Han Shuo pondered for a moment before he suddenly smiled and said, She came to the fringe to look for me? Haha, very good. With her here, we'll be even more assured. If she's in the pandemonium, even an overgod with a quintessence would have to be wary of her. Chapter 947. The fringe wasn't exactly huge, but it wasn't exactly small either. Even with Daka, Dagmar, and Acer leading their men, it took them more than 10 days to reach the valley where Han Hao was. Daka and the rest didn't encounter a single soul along the way. It was as if all the evil spirits in the fringe had vanished. It was so calm that it was stifling. The more it was like that, the more cautious they became. They were also very cautious along the way. After all, the fringe was someone else's territory. No matter how powerful they were, they didn't dare to be too ostentatious, especially when they knew that the other party was definitely hiding in the dark to ambush them. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer split up in 3 different directions, constantly monitoring their surroundings with their divine senses to make sure that no enemies would suddenly appear out of nowhere. Salus was unperturbed. Daka and the rest didn't ask any questions, so he remained silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Finally, they reached the vicinity of the 3 mountain peaks. Daka stopped in the distance and looked at the valley that was covered in a faint black fog. A foul stench wafted from it. He looked a little doubtful. Salus, are you sure this is the place? Daka glanced at Salus with a strange expression. It should be here. There's no mistaking it. Salus looked solemn. He also found it a little strange. He spread his divine sense out and didn't sense any soul ripples from the mountains. He wondered what that guy was up to. There's no one at all. Dagmar straightened his body as the bone throne carried him towards the valley in the middle of the 3 mountains. The black mist that permeated the entire valley was repelled by the death aura emanating from his bone throne, preventing it from entering his body in the slightest. Let's go take a look. Daka gave Acer a look, and the 2 of them followed Dagmar into the valley. The black fog around Tanai had a foul and acidic smell. It was obvious that it was highly toxic. However, the 3 of them were strong enough that it didn't affect them at all. Salus didn't follow them in. He just looked around curiously, paying attention to the details nearby. After his experience in Pandemonium, Salus was very wary of the place Han Shuo had set up. Moreover, he knew that Han Shuo didn't have good intentions in asking him to bring his men here. Therefore, he didn't dare to venture too deep into the place. Without Daka and the other 2's orders, their subordinates didn't move an inch. These Godhunter elites from the 3 divine dominions had been loyal dogs of the trio for many years. Not only were they powerful, they were also extremely disciplined. Without orders, they would not barge in recklessly. After Daka and the other 2 entered the valley in the middle of the 3 mountains, they roamed around. Apart from discovering many strange runes on the mountain walls, they didn't find anything else. They didn't sense any signs of life either. Soon, Daka and the other 2 returned to Salus's side from Tanai. Daka glanced at Salus and said, There shouldn't be any problems with this place. However, it seems that everyone has left. I believe that they more or less know that we're here. That Han Hao might have gathered his forces with the Han family. Yes, that's possible. After all, they should know that only by working together to defend against us will they not die a horrible death. Dagmar nodded in agreement. He then said impatiently, I think we can give up on this place and head straight to Pandemonium, right? At this point, Salus felt that he had done what he needed to do. Since there was no one in the Three Mountains, there was nothing he could do. If he forced the three of them to the Three Mountains, it would only make Daka and the others suspect him. That would only backfire. So, Salus didn't object and nodded in agreement. Then let's head straight to Pandemonium. The Han family's base is there. I believe that unless the Han family really doesn't want to stay in the Fringe, they won't leave, said Daka as he prepared to order his subordinates to leave. Wait. Dagmar raised his hand and stopped Daka from leaving. His eyes glowed. What's wrong? Daka was stunned for a moment before he asked, Did you find something? He naturally knew that Dagmar, who cultivated the power of death, was much more proficient in the aspect of soul detection than him. He and Acer might not be able to detect some weak soul undulations, but Dagmar was very likely to be sensitive enough to detect them. There's a weak soul pulse in the belly of the mountain. It pulsed just now. I need to confirm it. Dagmar nodded and closed his eyes. His soul magnetic field slowly spread out with Dagmar at the center. He seemed to be using a special method to sense the pulses in the belly of the Three Mountains. Daka and Acer knew that even though Dagmar had been behaving strangely due to the quintessence shard, his mastery of death was still at the overgod realm. Not to mention, Dagmar wasn't one to brag. His main target was Han Hao, so he was definitely more impatient than anyone else. So, he must have noticed something. As expected, after Dagmar closed his eyes and used his special method to sense for a moment, he pointed at the Three Mountains and said, There's no need to leave. There are people in all three mountains. It's just that there's a special energy in the belly of the mountain that's preventing our soul detection. Oomph, that Brian is truly amazing. The barrier he set up almost fooled us. How do you know that it wasn't Han Hao who set up the barrier? Asked Salus curiously. He doesn't have that ability. Dagmar sneered. Back in the depths of Tanai, I clearly felt his power after my subordinates subdued him. Humph. He's nowhere near as strong as you make him out to be. Without the quintessence shard, Han Hao is just an ordinary high god. I can crush him however I want. Dagmar, are you sure they're all hiding in the belly of the mountain? Daka asked after a moment of silence. There's no mistaking it. There are people in all three mountains. Dagmar seemed very confident. He turned to his subordinates behind him and said, Let's go. The poisonous mist in the valley isn't that big of a deal. Let's hurry. After a pause, Dagmar said to Daka and Acer, There are three mountains, so we'll each take one. We'll go in and search. There must be many winding passages in the belly of the mountain. We'll split up. I don't believe that a puny Han Hao can escape from the three of us. With that, Dagmar didn't care if Daka and Acer agreed or not, and charged into the valley again. After some hesitation, Daka nodded at Acer and said, Let's go too. Dagmar's soul perception shouldn't be wrong. We've worked together so many times over the years, and he's quite skilled in this area. Acer seemed to agree with Daka's opinion. He waved his hand and turned into a ray of dark light that shot into the valley. When his men saw Acer enter, they didn't hesitate and rushed in one after another. Salus, what about you? Daka wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he looked at Salus. I don't mind. Let's go. Salus shrugged and gestured for Daka to make the arrangements. Even though he knew that going in would be dangerous, he had no choice but to follow. Otherwise, Salus would definitely suspect him. All right, follow me then. That way, we'll be able to look out for each other. Daka smiled. Having received a satisfactory answer, he didn't hesitate any longer and entered the valley with his subordinates. By the time Daka and Salus arrived, Dagmar and Acer's men had already entered through the newly found hidden caves. The two of them chose the smaller peaks, leaving the tallest one for Daka. Daka cursed inwardly. He knew that although the two were talking about working together, they wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of the situation. Everyone in the God Hunter Alliance only cared about themselves. That was the nature of the God Hunter Alliance, and no one could change that. Let's go. Despite his anger, he still had to do what he had to do. Daka had no choice but to choose the tallest mountain and find a valley in the other direction that could only fit 3 people at a time. Together with Sokka's, he led the others in. My lord, just as you expected, there's a defensive barrier. In the belly of one of the smallest peaks, one of Dagmar's subordinates shouted. His voice reverberated in the belly of the mountain and reached Dagmar's ears in another passage. As soon as they entered the belly of the mountain, there were many forks in the road. Fortunately, Dagmar had anticipated this and had his men spread out as soon as there was a fork in the road, forming small teams that filled the various forks. The way Dagmar saw it, the strongest person in the mountain was Han Hao. After fighting with Han Hao's avatar in the Amphalos, Dagmar believed that he had figured out Han Hao's true strength and no longer considered Han Hao a worthy opponent. He believed that a mid-stage high god who didn't cultivate in the Edict of Death would be enough to deal with Han Hao. As such, he wasn't worried that Han Hao would appear in the mountain and take them out one by one. "He's here," Dagmar exclaimed from afar before rushing over. Layers of faint gray halos stood horizontally at the narrow cave entrance. The first layer was filled with the power of death, while the latter layers were filled with common powers such as darkness, water, and fire. Only the last layer was a little special, and Dagmar couldn't tell what it was. Without much hesitation, Dagmar made his move after sensing the layers of gray energy around the cave entrance. Much to Dagmar's surprise, the seemingly layered barrier didn't actually have much defensive power. When his energy of death transformed into 100 bone spears and pierced through, the layers of barrier were easily torn apart. Even the last layer of strange energy was destroyed in a single strike. It wasn't as difficult as he had imagined. "Let's go," Dagmar sneered. He felt even more disdain for Han Hao and his godhunter subordinates. Chapter 948. 100 meters later, a similar barrier appeared in front of him. This time, Dagmar didn't even hesitate to destroy the seemingly gorgeous but weak defensive barrier. He then charged straight into the heart of the mountain. Just like Dagmar, Daka and Acer also encountered the same barrier and chose the same method as Dagmar to go deeper. Within the belly of the three mountains, barriers kept appearing to block their path. They were torn apart by Daka, Dagmar, and Acer as they barged their way into the heart of the mountain. Outside the valley, one of Daka's subordinates exclaimed as he looked at the strange runes carved on the three mountains. Those oddly shaped runes with unknown meanings lit up one after another. Wisps of colorful smoke slowly seeped out of the runes and gathered in the black fog that lingered in the valley, causing the stench in the valley to become stronger and stronger. Daka, Acer, and Acer entered the belly of the mountain. As a precaution, Tanai left his men to keep an eye on the outside of the valley to prevent anyone from sneaking in and doing anything despicable. Seeing the changes happening to the three mountains, Daka, Acer, and Acer's subordinates' expressions turned solemn. Their eyes darted around, paying attention to the slightest change in their surroundings. Something's not right. One of Acer's subordinates frowned and took a deep breath. Tanai seems to have gained some sort of strange power. Even the strange runes on the mountain seem to have some sort of special power affecting this place. Is there a problem? I'll go in and report it to the Lord right away. Another of Acer's men acted immediately, rushing into the cave Acer had entered without hesitation. Crack, crack, crack. Crack, crack, crack. At this time, a strange sound came from the top of the three mountain peaks. The earth also shook violently, and a bottomless ravine was suddenly torn open under their feet. A strange power filled the valley and the three mountain peaks around it, and the runes on the three mountain peaks burst out with a dazzling radiance in an instant. There's a change. Daka's subordinates cried out in panic. You guys, go and report to the Lord Commander about the abnormality outside. It was the same for the people Dagmar left behind. They could sense that there was some sort of power slowly being released from the bottom of the three peaks. Not only was it affecting the valley, but it was also causing changes to the peaks. Before Dagmar's men could enter the belly of the mountain, an earth-shattering explosion resounded from the depths of the earth. Turbid air from the earth's core gushed out of the ravines and converged into the black mist in the valley. At the same time, the three mountains began to sway unsteadily amidst the violent tremors. The mountain Dagmar was on was swaying left and right, its tilt increasing as if it was a drunken giant. What's going on? Dagmar, Daka, and Acer shouted at the same time from the center of the three mountains. "It's dangerous. Everyone retreat." In the belly of another mountain, Acer howled, and the sound waves exploded like thunder in the mountain tunnel, spreading in all directions. At the center of the mountain, they felt the changes even more deeply than Dagmar. There seemed to be a terrifying energy core at the center of the mountain that they had yet to reach. It was constantly pouring energy crystals into the mountain. As the mountain trembled and tilted, the boulders on the walls of the mountain bounced and crashed down from the top of their heads. These powerful god hunters wouldn't have to worry about their lives if it were an ordinary boulder falling from the mountain. However, as the mountain began to sway and the terrifying energy crystals at the center of the mountain began to spread, an unknown amount of bizarre energy permeated the entire mountain. Every single boulder that fell from the mountain contained extremely terrifying energy. Not only did that force weigh more than 5 million kilograms, but it also increased the speed at which the boulders rolled down the mountain. As the mountain was narrow and the god hunters were in great numbers, there was no way for them to avoid the impact of the boulders. Many of them were violently smashed into. Under the impact of the strange energy permeating the rocks, the god hunters, whose bodies weren't much stronger than ordinary humans, immediately fell to the ground with blood flowing out of their orifices. Those god hunters who were facing the falling rocks hurriedly formed energy barriers above their heads, hoping to avoid being struck by the strange rocks. Unfortunately, the boulders that had been imbued with a lot of power were extremely fast and terrifying. When a boulder fell on the barrier of power, it distorted the barrier. When a few large boulders fell together, the barrier that they had set up was as fragile as an eggshell, and it suddenly shattered into pieces. Within the belly of the mountain, rocks tumbled down and rolled back and forth along the slope of the mountain, causing great damage to the god hunters inside. The boulders, which contained a peculiar energy within them, were so sturdy that they rendered many powerless. Even when they blocked off the tunnels, they found it difficult to break through the god hunters' attacks. Only when several god hunters joined forces would they be able to break through the boulders. However, the moment the rocks were broken, they would explode like bombs. The shrapnels had extremely powerful penetrative force and shot everywhere in the narrow passages, causing great damage to the god hunters. Even though they knew that it would be very troublesome to destroy the rocks by force, they had no choice but to give it their all. That was because their escape route out of the mountain was completely blocked by the rocks. If they didn't leave before the mountain exploded with even more power, they knew that they wouldn't be able to escape alive. "Salus, look at what you've done." Daka roared angrily as he smashed the rocks in his way while loudly criticizing Salus. At this point, Daka knew that he had fallen for someone else's scheme and had fallen into a trap. The way he saw it, it was Salus's responsibility to bring them here. However, he didn't think that Salus would betray them. "How could I have known that this would happen? Daka, did you think that I framed you?" Salus sneered guiltily as he helped Daka. "What reason would I have to frame you? Brian and I have an irreconcilable grudge against each other. I'm here with you to settle the score with him." Daka didn't think too much about it. Seeing that Salus was getting agitated, he coldly said, "I don't know if you framed us or not, but if it wasn't for your suggestion, we wouldn't have ended up in this situation. Don't you King slander me." Salus roared. "Dagmar was the one who made a fuss about coming in here. What does it have to do with me? Damn it, blaming others every time something goes wrong. If this goes on, I'm not going to serve you anymore." Salus wasn't a kind person. Back in the fringe, his temper was even worse than Daka's. But after suffering at the hands of Han Shuo and his son, he had toned down a lot. However, a person's nature wasn't something that could be easily changed. Given that Salus didn't care about scheming people like Daka in the first place, his attitude naturally turned nasty. Seeing that Salus was so angry, Daka didn't say anything else. He snorted a few times and didn't say anything else. He understood that he still needed Salus to help him clear through the mountain obstructions. If Salus ignored him out of spite, he and Salus might be able to avoid the disaster with their strength as overgods, but most of his subordinates would definitely be dead or injured. Daka didn't waste any more time and focused on destroying the boulders blocking the way. The boulders contained a lot of special energy and were difficult for most god hunters to destroy. But with Daka and Salus's strength, it wasn't too much of a problem. Under their continuous bombardment, a path leading to the outside was blasted open. "Retreat," Daka yelled, but he didn't rush out first. Instead, he turned around and yelled at his subordinates. His subordinates felt as if they had been pardoned from a great crime and hurriedly rushed towards the only way out. Asterisk rumble. 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 Asterisk a loud rumble came from the center of the mountain and reverberated through every path. The mountain started to shake violently again. The two of them felt that the mountain might collapse at any moment. Heavens, what's going on? Daka's subordinates in the center of the valley were shocked and dumbfounded. It turned out that as the rumble came from the center of the three mountains, even larger ravines were torn open at the foot of the three mountains. The ravines were hundreds of meters long and spread out like a spider web. The three mountain peaks trembled violently after the densely packed ravines appeared, rapidly sinking into the bottomless depths of the earth. It was as if a giant mouth had opened up beneath the three mountains and was about to swallow them whole. "Quick, get out of here!" Daka was shocked. He could already feel the mountains rapidly sinking into the earth. He couldn't imagine who could have such terrifying power to make three mountains sink into the earth in such a short period of time. There was no longer any force that could stop the mountains from sinking. As the three mountains slowly sank into the earth began to contract and compress the mountain, causing a terrifying force to erupt from the center of the mountain. It was as if lightning had ignited the flames of the earth. Something terrifying happened once more. Following an earth-shattering rumble, the three mountains that were slowly sinking into the earth began to crumble. The strange runes on the mountain walls exploded one after another. The explosions seemed to have triggered some kind of energy from the mountains, causing the three mountains to crumble. The god hunters inside the mountains were either killed by the explosion or by the impact of the falling boulders. In an instant, the three hegemon subordinates in the mountains suffered heavy casualties. Chapter 949. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer had never imagined that they would suffer such heavy losses in this trip to the fringe, not to mention that it would come so quickly. It was so violent. The three mountains sank deep into the ground in just a few dozen seconds. The terrifying explosive force came from the center of the mountains. In an instant, thousands of their subordinates were killed. This was perhaps the most devastating blow they had ever suffered in the fringe. Loud rumbles echoed from the area. After the three mountains sank halfway into the ground, they began to crumble from the center. The energy contained within the mountains was released in an instant, causing the god hunters in the mountains to wail and howl. One after another, they were sent flying out of the mountains with blood spurting out of them. Rolling smoke descended from the sky. It was unknown if it had been waiting for a long time, but at the right time, it came grumblingly with the terrifying power. Many people who had flown out of the mountain had their bodies squeaking under the pressure of the rolling smoke. Their bodies were crushed into meat paste, falling into the massive ravines. It turned out that the black fog that filled the entire valley had been waiting for this moment after absorbing the turbid gas from the Earth's core. The three mountains had turned into a living hell. Although the explosions gradually calmed down, the wails and howls did not stop. Instead, they grew even more intense. The blood-curdling screams made one's hair stand on end. Gradually, the dust settled, and the sound of the explosion died down. After taking away hundreds and thousands of lives, the smoke that suddenly pressed down quietly disappeared with the wind without a trace. Dust and sand settled down from the sky. There were no more rocks flying out. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. The three mountains sunk deep into the earth, but did not explode into smithereens. Gradually, figures covered in wounds walked out from the mountains. Some had blood dripping from the corners of their mouths, some had broken arms, but only a few dozen of them were completely unscathed. All of them, without exception, were high gods of formidable strength. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer were the last to walk out of the mountains. Their subordinates looked at them with pitiful expressions. The three of them looked like volcanoes that could erupt at any moment. The intense killing intent emanating from them made even their high god subordinates afraid to approach them. Salus walked out as well. He was overwhelmed with shock and had a deeper understanding of how terrifying the Han family was. At this moment, Salus no longer intended to fight to the death with the Han family. It wasn't that Salus was a coward, but Daka and the rest hadn't seen a single person today, and almost half of their experts had died. This far exceeded Salus's expectations of the Han family. Recalling the past, Salus couldn't help but smile bitterly. Back then, he was just like Daka and the other two, full of ambition to destroy Pandemonium. In the end, he was trapped in a strange barrier, and his subordinates didn't see a single member of the Han family. Just like today, they suffered heavy losses. After experiencing it once again, Salus had completely lost his temper. In a one-on-one fight, he was not a match for the Han family. In a team fight, the terrifying strength of the Han family's guards had gradually made many forces tremble in fear. On top of that, the Han family's defenses were ridiculously strong. Salus really didn't know how he could go up against the Han family. Forget it. Forget it. I'd better get rid of that obsession in my heart. Salus, who had originally planned to settle the score with the Han family, only now did he truly understand himself and get rid of that obsession in his heart. After taking a deep breath, Daka pondered for a long while before finally gritting his teeth and roaring, "Do a head count." The subordinate beside Daka, who didn't dare to speak first, immediately gave the order. Dagmar and Acer waved their hands grimly, signaling for their subordinates to report the number of casualties. The three subordinates reported names one after another, but only half of them responded. Daka and the other two listened in silence, their faces turning darker and darker. Soon, the results were out. Each of them had around 1,000 subordinates, but only half of them were still alive. Now, Tanai Shan only had slightly more than 2,000 god hunters left, and most of them were injured to varying degrees. They hadn't even encountered a single member of the Han family, but they had already lost half of their men. "Salus," Dagmar roared, glaring at him with a pair of venomous eyes. "We were about to leave, but you insisted on turning back. What does that have to do with me?" Salus wasn't afraid at all. He looked coldly at Daka and Acer, who were also looking at him, and said, "Every time something goes wrong, you push all the blame onto me. Is that how you do things? Why did the Han family know we were coming? Why did they set up a trap for us? Salus, don't tell me you didn't know anything. There can't be such a coincidence." Dagmar barked. The bone throne floated over and landed in front of Salus. "Of course I didn't know." Salus roared. He pointed at Dagmar and roared, "Do you think I would betray you? Damn it. I was chased out of the fringe by Brian and the Han family. My Empyrean peak was razed to the ground and I can't go back to my home? Do you think I would ally with them to deal with you? Dagmar, have you lost your mind because of the quintessence shard? I don't believe that the Han family is so resourceful. If it weren't for you leading the way, we wouldn't have come here," Acer, who was usually quiet, suddenly said. He seemed to have his own suspicions. Salus was stunned for a moment before he suddenly retreated, letting Daka, Acer, and Dagmar stay a safe distance away. He then sneered, "You're all crazy. You blame me for your men's deaths. It seems that there's nothing more to say. I won't be playing with you three anymore. Do whatever you want." Without waiting for the three to say anything, Salus shot into the sky and disappeared in a flash. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer were stunned. They didn't expect him to leave just like that, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Be it Dagmar, Acer, or Daka, the reason why they blamed Salus was partly because they were a little suspicious, but more importantly, they wanted someone to take the blame. After all, the losses were too great, and they didn't think it would be easy to explain it to their subordinates. All they could do was blame Salus. In their hearts, they really didn't think that Salus and Han Shual would work together. Just as Salus said, he had an irreconcilable grudge with the Han family. They only allowed Salus to participate because they had a detailed understanding of his experiences in the Omphalos. So, although the three of them blamed Salus, they didn't gang up on him. If they really thought that Salas had betrayed them, they wouldn't have shown it. They would have found a chance to attack Salas when he wasn't paying attention and killed him before Salas could figure out what was going on. The three of them looked at each other with even more dismay. They didn't expect Salas to leave so decisively and disappear without a trace. Now that they had lost Salas, the local tyrant, and their subordinates were either injured or dead, things would be even more difficult to handle later on. Damn it, this guy actually left. Dagmar was furious. His heart was full of resentment, but he had nowhere to vent it. He had only wanted to push the blame onto Salas, but he didn't expect that Salas would abandon him before he could achieve his goal. So be it. With our current strength, as long as we don't fall into any traps, we should be able to deal with Pandemonium. Daka knew that the three of them couldn't afford to be disloyal anymore. Even if he wanted to curse Dagmar, he could only hold it in for the time being. Daka was full of confidence when he came. He didn't hold back at all when he said that he would completely destroy the Han family. But now, when he talked about Pandemonium, he unknowingly lost some of his confidence. He was no longer as certain as before. That's right, we can definitely destroy Pandemonium, Dagmar emphasized, but it sounded like he was trying to cheer himself up. Daka and the other two had suffered far too many casualties in these 3 mountains. They were no longer as sharp as before. Let's stabilize their injuries first. It's best that we leave this place immediately. This place is a little strange. Acer looked at the 3 mountains that had sunk halfway into the ground and felt extremely uncomfortable. His suggestion was immediately agreed to by the other 2. Without further ado, the 3 of them took inventory of the remaining soldiers and left Tanai. After the 3 of them disappeared for a while, Han Shuo and Han Hao emerged from the huge ravine below them. Han Shuo looked at the situation from midair and said regretfully, "Too much formation power will make the attack uneven. Otherwise, the 3 mountains wouldn't just have collapsed, but would have exploded. If that had happened, let alone their subordinates, even Daka and the other 2 would have been heavily injured. Father, this is already not bad. With this, the 3 of them won't be able to cause much trouble in Pandemonium." Han Hao looked at the ravine and said worriedly, "Won't the collapse of the mountains and the rupture of the earth affect my underground palace?" "It will definitely affect it a little, but don't worry. Hee. When this is over, Little Earth, Little Gold and the others will come and spend some time. Not only will they be able to restore this place, but the ground will also be filled with rocks. It will make your palace even more secure." Han Shuo laughed. While talking to Han Hao, Han Shuo waved his hand and recalled the God Hunter souls that had yet to dissipate back into his body. Then, he said to Han Hao, "Let's go. We'll wait for them in Pandemonium." "I'm afraid that they won't dare to come in this time." Han Hao's lips curled into a faint smile. He felt that playing with Daka was rather interesting. "It's fine. It's best if they don't dare to come in. Let them go to Omphalos. Logan Tyre are there anyway. It's better for us if they fight to the death." Han Shuo laughed heartily and left with Little Skull's half-finished avatar. Chapter 950. When Han Shuo returned to the Pandemonium, he was surprised to see Andrina. The little girl who was taken away by her mother in the Darkness Dominion was clearly much stronger than before. Andrina was acquainted with Phoebe and a few others back in the Darkness Dominion. When Phoebe and the others discovered her presence in the Pandemonium, they naturally let Andrina in. Otherwise, even with Andrina's current strength, it wouldn't be easy for her to enter the Pandemonium unscathed. In order to defend against the God Hunter Alliance's attack, Han Shuo had deployed many terrifying magical formations in the Pandemonium. Without the permission of the Han family, outsiders would have to pay an unbearable price. Andrina had stayed in the Pandemonium for a few days. She was very curious about Tanai. Not only did the Pandemonium have all kinds of barriers and energy crystals, but also the demonic formations deployed by Han Shuo and the 5 elite zombies. It was the demonic formations deployed by Han Shuo and the 5 elite zombies that attracted Andrina's attention. Their unique energy source piqued Andrina's curiosity. She asked about the usage and principles of the demonic formations in the Pandemonium. However, as the 5 elite zombies were still cultivating underground, no one was able to explain them to Andrina. Perhaps it was because Angelina was too bored in the Dominion of Destiny that she was very excited to come to Pandemonium. She seemed to always find something that interested her. She would even personally enter some formations to test them out. Every time, she would find something that would surprise her. When Han Shuo returned, Andrina naturally became even more excited. She exclaimed when she saw Han Shuo, "You scoundrel! Why didn't you look for me when you came to the Fringe? The Destiny Dominion is right next to the Pandemonium. How disloyal of you!" Andrina had always been cold and unfeeling towards others, but Han Shuo was an exception. "Aren't I busy? There are so many people who need me to take care of them. Where would I find the time? Besides, I don't even know where the Shrine of Destiny is. I don't even know where to look for you in the Destiny Dominion." Han Shuo smiled. He had never thought of going to the Destiny Dominion to see Andrina. For some reason, Han Shuo always felt that the Goddess of Destiny and the Dominion of Destiny was more difficult to deal with. Sometimes, Han Shuo even suspected that the Goddess of Destiny already knew that he cultivated demonic arts and secretly knew something. The reason why Sui Xiong had such doubts was that he had been facing more and more powerful opponents in the past few years, and he no longer concealed his demonic arts. If the Goddess of Destiny knew about the Demon Venerable's appearance in this universe, she would naturally be able to guess some of his origins and secrets. The Goddess of Destiny, as the main god of destiny, if she didn't know anything about his situation, it wouldn't make sense. "What are you busy with?" Andrina raised her head and harumphed. "You think I don't know what you've been doing in the Fringe? Let me tell you, from the moment you stepped into the Fringe, I've seen your every move." Han Shuo was stunned. He asked tentatively, "Oh? You haven't left the shrine, so how did you know my every move?" "My mother told me." Andrina giggled and said, "My mother said you have a lot of secrets. She knows your every move very well, and she often tells me about you." Han Shuo's heart sank. Something was wrong. Han Shuo didn't pursue the matter further. He smiled and asked Andrina, "How did you decide to come here? Does your mother know about it?" "I don't know. She seemed to have gone to see the god of death, Nestet. I took the opportunity to sneak away, hee." Andrina didn't seem to be worried about the goddess of destiny's punishment. Han Shuo was stunned. He looked at Andrina with a bitter smile and didn't know what to say. "I heard that the God Hunter Alliance is planning to invade the Fringe. I came here to support you." "Why? You don't welcome me?" Andrina raised her brow and pretended to be angry. "Welcome, welcome. How could I not welcome you?" Han Shuo put on a delighted look and pulled Andrina to her feet. He said, "Tanai still has some energy towers that I'm not satisfied with. Now that you're here, let me take a good look at them." The energy Andrina cultivated was different from ordinary people. Andrina had reached a very miraculous realm in the use of energy crystals. With Andrina's help, Han Shuo believed that the defenses of Pandemonium would reach new heights. "I've already checked on you, but because you haven't returned, I didn't dare to act on my own. I don't want those guys to think that I'm trying to destroy this place." Andrina had been wandering around Pandemonium for a long time, and she had been itching to show off her power. She immediately agreed to Han Shuo's suggestion. After taking a short pause, Andrina said, "But if you want me to help you modify those energy towers, you don't have enough energy crystals right now. You need at least 3 times the energy crystals before I can start. Do you have that many energy crystals?" "No problem." Han Shuo laughed heartily. Using his consciousness, he instructed Metal Elite Zombie, who was meditating in the secret chamber, to bring up all the energy crystals he had. As the owner of Goldstone, Metal Elite Zombie naturally had no lack of energy crystals. Most of the defenses of Pandemonium were made up of demonic formations, leaving most of the energy crystals unused. On top of that, Little Skull Han Hao had plundered a lot of goods from various large shops. Therefore, the underground warehouse of Pandemonium had a very large stock of energy crystals. Metal Elite Zombie, who was practicing the Penta-Elemental Undead formation with Wood Elite Zombie and the others in the secret chamber, immediately stopped practicing after receiving Han Shuo's telepathic instructions. He went to the warehouse of energy crystals, filled up an entire space ring, and returned to the surface. Huh. Metal Elite Zombie cried out in surprise as soon as he arrived beside Han Shuo. His eyes were glowing as he stared at Andrina. He was dumbstruck and stood there motionless. Circles of dazzling white crystal light rippled out from Angelina's body. She also looked at Metal Elite Zombie with a very strange expression. Her pupils emitted a dazzling halo. One Metal Elite Zombie and one Angelina. They were like two magnets, firmly staring at each other. Bizarre soul undulations emanated from the two. Unbeknownst to Han Shuo, the two had started communicating in a way that even Han Shuo couldn't understand. In an instant, it was as though Han Shuo had become an extra and was completely ignored by the two. The conversation between the two was very long. They just stared at each other, motionless, for a few hours. In the beginning, Han Shuo was somewhat baffled. Later on, he gradually realized the reason behind it. Metal Elite Zombie was refined by Han Shuo with the yuan energy of metal. In addition to having the golden cudgel in his body, he was the darling of all metal and stone. He was born with an understanding of metal and stone and was able to distinguish the energy of each type of metal and stone. He could even fuse himself with metal and stone to pierce through mountains and split rocks. Andrina was also a special life form. She could consume energy crystals to increase her strength. Whether it was her life magnetic field or the energy she grasped, they all carried the purity of energy crystals. Even her bones and body were filled with the purest energy of energy crystals. Andrina was like a piece of the purest and most special energy crystal. However, she possessed life. The more special the stone, the more attractive it was to the Metal Elite Zombie. Similarly, the Metal Elite Zombie's origin energy from the Metal Elite Zombie's body was also extremely attractive to Angelina. When these two bizarre life forms met, if nothing miraculous happened, it would really be rather inexcusable. Metal Elite Zombie and Andrina communicated in a way that no one could understand. They were motionless like two boulders. If it wasn't for the intense soul undulations coming from their bodies, Han Shuo would have thought that the two were the most ordinary of stones. Han Shuo looked at the two with great interest. He felt somewhat happy. Perhaps it was because of his messy style. He always hoped that the 5 elite zombies and Little Skull could be like him, not only possessing valiant strength, but also truly living their own lives. Han Shuo didn't want the 5 elite zombies and Little Skull to be emotionless beings. He wanted them to live like normal people. He wanted them to possess more human emotions, have their own women, and even have their own children. In the depths of Han Shuo's heart, he truly thought of the 5 elite zombies and Little Skull as his own children. Every father in the world would not only wish for their children to be safe, but also to live a good and perfect life. Han Shuo was no exception. He felt that if the 5 elite zombies and Little Skull could have their own families, that would be the ideal outcome he desired. Like two magnets, Andrina and Metal Elite Zombie seemed to be naturally attracted to each other. They stared at each other for a long time. After a long while, Zovik hurriedly returned and reported some news to Han Shuo. His loud voice seemed to have awakened Andrina and Metal Elite Zombie. Their eyes gradually regained clarity. Almost at the same time, Metal Elite Zombie and Andrina put on a faint smile and very naturally walked towards each other, holding hands. Everything was so natural, and there wasn't the slightest bit of awkwardness. It was as though Metal Elite Zombie and Andrina were a couple who had been in love for hundreds or thousands of years. After holding hands, the two were overjoyed and looked at each other with gazes filled with deep love. Han Shuo was stunned. He had thought that Metal Elite Zombie and Andrina might end up together, but he didn't think that the two would come together so quickly, so directly, and so naturally. Father, I finally understand why you and Phoebe and the others are like that. Hee, what a wonderful feeling. Han Jin looked at Han Shuo smilingly as though he had a deep understanding of love. For some reason, when Han Shuo addressed Han Shuo's women, whether it was the 5 elite zombies or Little Skull, he addressed them directly by their names without any additional emotions. Very good, very good. Han Shuo was delighted and laughed heartily. Chapter 951. Leave the rest to the two of us. Andrina and I will take care of everything, said Han Jin confidently. It seemed that he was very excited about communicating with Andrina through the soul. That's right. We will take care of what needs to be done. Don't worry, said Andrina with a faint smile. She would turn to look at Han Jin from time to time as she spoke. Han Jin was rather familiar with the layout of the Pandemonium. Back when Han Shuo was constructing the various formations in the Pandemonium, Han Jin and the other four sovereigns had been helping him. Therefore, apart from Han Shuo, the five sovereigns were the only ones who were familiar with the Pandemonium's formations. With Han Jin helping Andrina, Han Shuo believed that she would be able to bring out her full potential. Seeing that the two sovereigns were very confident, Han Shuo naturally let them do as they pleased. He nodded and smilingly said, "Very well, I happen to have some matters to take care of." After giving Han Jin a few reminders about the modifications to the special formations and the things to pay attention to, Han Shuo left the task of modifying the energy towers in the Pandemonium to the two sovereigns. When Zovik arrived, he reported to Han Shuo that the various factions of the God Hunter Alliance had entered the fringe. Tyre, Log, Wasis, Asura, and the others would soon face the joint attack of the hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance. On the surface, the hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance were very powerful. They usually moved in groups. At this rate, the sovereigns of the fringe would be in for a very difficult battle. However, Han Shuo knew that the four sovereigns had their own trump cards. After all, the fringe was a place that they had set up for many years. If they could make full use of the unique terrain of the fringe, gather their powerful forces, and use special methods to attack, even a demigod would be gravely injured. Take Log's boneyard, for example. It contained the intense element of death that Log had meticulously set up for many years. As long as he was in the boneyard, Log's power would greatly increase. In the boneyard, Log would probably be able to defeat Tyre. That was because Log had long become one with the element of death in the boneyard. He could use all of the energy in the boneyard. If the invading god hunters entered the boneyard, Log could use the energy of the boneyard to gather his many high god subordinates to attack an overgod of the same realm as him. He could injure the overgod severely in an instant or even destroy his divine soul. Tyre, Wazer, and Asura were in a similar situation. If they could make good use of their forces and create an advantageous situation for themselves, they would be able to put up a good fight as local tyrants. But if the battle did not take place in the ideal of the overgod, they would be. When he arrived at the bottom of Pandemonium, he found a strand of little skeleton's divine soul and asked, "How long will it take for your main body to return?" "I have already entered the fringe. I should be able to return in 3 days," replied Little Skull calmly after thinking for a moment. Han Shuo nodded and said in a deep voice, "I have attached a strand of my consciousness to the demon general to keep an eye on Dagmar and the others. They are still recovering. I don't think they will dare to enter the Pandemonium for another 10 days or so. With you in the Pandemonium, the 5 elite zombies, Andrina, and Sanguine are using the power of the Pandemonium well. Even if Daka and the others were to attack, they won't be able to breach the Pandemonium's defenses in a short period of time." "You have business to attend to?" asked Little Skull. He immediately realized something. "Yeah, I'm going out for a bit. Don't worry, I will return as soon as I finish my business. Given your strength and my arrangements in the Pandemonium, Daka and the others won't be able to attack immediately." "There shouldn't be any problems," said Han Shuo. "Go ahead. I will keep an eye on this place," said Little Skull with a nod. Han Shuo then carefully described the usage of the demonic formations in the Pandemonium. After making sure that Little Skull was familiar with the formations in the Pandemonium, Han Shuo quietly left. The glacial cave on Glacial Peak. Wasi sat cross-legged in the cave like an ice sculpture. The ice that enveloped him emanated a bone-chilling aura. A figure knelt at the entrance of the glacial cave and respectfully reported, "My lord, I have received reliable news that the hegemons of the space-time and destiny dominions are on their way here." Crack, crack. The ice sculpture suddenly broke free and a frigid energy was released from Wasi's body. The ice sculpture shattered like glass. Wasi's body was still emanating a frosty aura. He slowly moved his arms and legs. The frosty aura on Wasi's body seemed to have fused with the glacial cave. "Ansit, are you sure?" asked Wasis after moving for a while. Ansit, who also cultivated in the Edict of Water, quietly took a few steps back. The frosty aura emanating from Wasis was so terrifying that even Ansit found it hard to withstand it. There's no doubt about it. They are heading towards Glacial Peak. The hegemons of the Space-Time and Destiny Dominions are said to be the two most mysterious existences in the God Hunter Alliance. No one knows their true strength. "What should we do?" asked Ansit respectfully. "Space-Time, Destiny." Wasis bunched his brows as though he was thinking about something very important. After a while, Wasis said, "I'm really looking forward to meeting a hegemon who cultivates in these two energies. It is said that the Edict of Destiny is the most miraculous of the 12 fundamental energies. There are very few experts who can reach High God Realm by cultivating the Edict of Destiny. Each and every one of them is an extremely mysterious and unfathomable character. I wonder what realm this hegemon is at. My lord, those who cultivate in the Edict of Space-Time are also very terrifying. If there is an overgod among them, they can even sneak into Glacial Peak. Should we make preparations in advance?" Ansit was rather nervous. Although Wasis was powerful, he was only one person. However, his opponents were hegemons from two dominions. Ansit did not know if Wasis could handle them by himself. "Everything that needs to be prepared has been prepared." Wasis shot a glance at Ansit as though he could read her mind. He said indifferently, "As cultivators of the Edict of Ice, our hearts should be as hard as ice. We should not be afraid of any threat. If you wish to advance further, you must remember that even if you are about to die, you must not feel fear." "Thank you for your guidance, my lord." Ansit respectfully kowtowed to Wasis. She was sincerely grateful. Among the 5 sovereigns of the Fringe, Wasis was the most unreasonable one. However, Wazer was also famous for one thing. As long as his subordinates cultivated in the elemental energy of water, he would always give them pointers in their cultivation. As a result, the strength of those who followed him would improve by leaps and bounds. Even though Ansit had cultivated the energy of water to late-stage High God Realm and might very well be able to reach the same realm as him with his guidance, Wazer didn't put up any guard against him. He would still say whatever he needed to say. It was as though he wasn't afraid that his subordinates would surpass him. It was for this reason that most of the fiends who came to the Fringe from the 12 dominions and cultivated in the elemental energy of water would join Wazer's cause. "Let's go. Tell them that they no longer need to stand guard outside Glacial Peak. Activate all the energy towers and gather the frigid energy of Glacial Peak. Those who don't cultivate in the elemental energy of water are to stay in the mountain for now," Wazer said to Ansit after a moment of silence. "Everyone, go into the caves." Ansit nodded repeatedly. She immediately left after Wasis finished his orders and conveyed his orders to her subordinates. However, as soon as Ansit's orders were conveyed, Wasis's subordinates had yet to carry them out. Suddenly, an enormous space-time rift appeared above Glacial Peak. Numerous figures flew out from it and stood densely on the Glacial Peak. Their eyes were cold and sinister as they searched for their next target. "Wazer, I can see through your plans in advance. Your fate has already been decided. Come out, we can have a good talk if you don't want your subordinates to die with you," said an old woman with a 6-pointed star pattern on her chest. She was holding a crystal ball glowing in green light. Her voice was strangely bewitching as it reverberated above Glacial Peak. As she spoke, many figures flew out from the space-time rift behind her. Finally, an old man with long eyebrows came out from the space-time rift. He closed the space-time rift as though he was closing a door. "Wasis, with Maski's ability to predict your movements and my sealing of the space-time rift, you won't be able to escape." After the old man closed the space-time rift, he walked to the glacial cavern with a smile on his face. With a wave of his hand, the space-time distorted and ripples spread outwards. Ansit and Wasis's subordinates were about to dive into the glacial cavern when they suddenly discovered that the space-time rift had warped. They were trapped in the glacial cavern, unable to move at all. They had no way to resolve the situation and carry out Wasis's orders. One can predict my movements, the other can seal the space-time rift. The two of you working together is probably the most perfect combination. How lucky I am. Wasis's voice came from the glacial cavern. When his voice faded, he was already standing at the entrance of the glacial cavern, staring coldly at the two. Wasis, not only your fate, but the fate of the fringe has been sealed, said the old woman called Maski with a solemn expression, as though she was the messenger in charge of everything. She fiddled with the crystal ball with her fingers as she spoke nonchalantly. You're not an over-god, Wasis suddenly said as he looked deeply at Maski. Those who cultivate in the Edict of Destiny. Maski pointed in the direction of the Dominion of Destiny. Except for that one. No one can reach the overgod realm, not even a pseudo-overgod. We're different from you. You can reach this realm without a quintessence, but we don't have a quintessence and will forever be high gods. After a short pause, Maski chuckled softly and said, But that's enough. At this point, Maski's brow furrowed. The crystal ball flashed, and Maski suddenly shouted, Dennis, do it. He seems to be waiting for someone, and I can't predict who it is. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.